Hello, my name's Cody Leroy Rollins of the Grand Valley State Veterans History Project. I'm here with Robert Heath of Allendale, Michigan, and let's go ahead and jump into it. So we'll start off easy. Where and when were you born?
So I was born September 18th, 1979 in Chicago, Illinois.
All right. What was your early life like?
A lot of moving around. My father was in the Army, and so we moved to Germany, we moved to South Carolina, and then we wound up back in the Chicagoland, Northwest Indiana area, and that's where I graduated high school, in Maryville.
Okay. When you were a military brat, you lived in Germany. How old were you?
So we moved to Germany when I was 7, almost 8, and then we lived there for about 3.5 years, from 87 to summer of 90.
Were you living on a base or were you living out in town?
Yeah, we did a little bit of both. When we first got over there, there wasn't base housing available, so we lived in Hamburg. My dad was stationed in Vilseck, so we lived in Hamburg for about 6 months, and that was a really interesting experience because I spoke no German when I went, and so learning how to play with the kids and go out and everything, but it was a lot of fun. Learned how to play games, got some friends who spoke enough English, and then I learned enough German so that we could make it happen. And so we spent about 6 months on the economy, and then we moved back in onto base. I want to say about the winter of that year.
Okay. And was that a huge culture shock going from that life on the town to like the more structured military base life?
It wasn't so much of a culture shock there, just because, I mean, as a kid, it's not as structured, right? Like you go to school, you come home, you live in a neighborhood, it's the same idea. It was actually cool because my parents, because when we lived in Hamburg, it was about a half-hour drive back and forth, so they had about a half-hour commute, whereas now it was like 5 minutes from dad getting off to dad getting home, so it was a lot cooler because we got to see him a lot more.
That's pretty awesome. Do you know what your dad did in the Army?
Yeah, he was a supply sergeant, so he did a lot of, I remember one of the things that he talked about was, because we left right in June, July timeframe of 1990, which was the run-up to Desert Storm. And so he was sitting there and he's like, why are we sending all these tanks to, Saudi Arabia? What's the point in that? Because all of that was going through UCOM and going through Germany. And so he was in charge of a whole bunch of Abrams tanks, and then I can't remember the second one. The second set is something with Bravo in it. But anyway, he was in charge of all of those, and we got one of the cool things growing up as a kid was he could get us into, like I remember he got access for my class and my teachers and everything. We took a field trip to the simulators, so all of our classmates got to go and run through the simulators and be, the captain in the tank and all the rest of that type of stuff, and the gunner, and we got to simulate firing on targets and all the rest of that type of stuff. It was a lot of fun.
That's pretty awesome. How long was your dad in the Army?
He stayed in for 11 years.
Okay.
He wound up being a drill sergeant down in Fort Jackson, and then we wound up getting out a little shortly after that.
Okay. And then was that when you moved to Chicago?
That was when we moved back home, yeah. And then my dad, he got into trucking. He actually owned a trucking business for a while, and wound up getting out of that when the downturn happened in the late 90s, mid 90s.
Okay. Yeah, so did that have a big impact on your life, the military?
The military was a tremendous impact on my life. I remember looking back at my childhood years, that was the time that I felt kind of most, it was the best group of years when I look back at my childhood. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that there was a kind of a homogenous community of not necessarily of races or, ethnicities, but because of the fact that everybody was moving towards the same target. You had a group of Army spouses, Army soldiers, and then Army kids. So we all knew we lived the same life and had the same experiences.
Yeah, and I guess that was pretty different once you were going to high school, huh?
Yeah, it was a completely different thing. And high school was interesting too, because like I said, I'm from Chicago. All my family's in Chicago. We lived in Maryville, which is about 30 minutes outside of Chicago, just across the Indiana border. But all of my social life was Chicago, so high school was kind of a split experience.
Yeah. So what'd you do after high school?
So then I went to college at the University of Illinois down in Champaign-Urbana, and I graduated a little bit early. So I graduated when I was 16, so I went down to college at Champaign, and then I studied and got my degrees in economics and speech communications with a minor in Spanish.
Okay. So when did you decide you wanted to join the Marines?
That came a lot later, actually. I had always wanted to serve in the military, but I always tell everybody, like, when I graduated college, I was not military material. I was not in the place where anybody was going to be telling me to do anything. And so I graduated in 2001, and I wanted to impact and be able to have an impact on my community and to give back. So I went and got a master's degree in teaching. I taught Spanish and coached basketball for 6 years. And really, the Marine Corps came about as I call it during my quarter life crisis period. I went through and I was looking at some of the things that I had wanted to do in my youth. I was about 27 when I decided to join, and things that I had wanted to do and that I wasn't able to do, or that I didn't complete for whatever reason, because I wasn't disciplined enough, because I didn't care enough, because I didn't want to go through all the red tape to do whatever it was. And I decided that wasn't going to be the case anymore. And I had always wanted to serve in the military, but like I said, I had to become ready to serve in the military.
Yeah, you weren't quite up to taking orders yet.
Yeah, you can't really be anti-authoritarian and serve in an organization where you got to follow orders. It just doesn't work. So at that point in time, I looked at my life and I said, there were a couple of things that I had always wanted to do that I hadn't done yet. I'd always wanted to go to law school. I'd always wanted to become a lawyer, and I'd always wanted to be in the military. And so I went and I saw a recruiter, and it was actually happenstance. I had a bit of bronchitis. I was at a clinic getting checked out, and there's a recruit office right next to that office. And I was in this moment, so I was like, here, let me go and walk over and see what the Marines got to say. So I walked over, and this was actually an enlisted recruitment station, but the RS just happened to be there. And so he came in and he talked to me about the officer programs. And he was like, oh, you're interested in law and you want to be a Marine Corps officer? Psh, we've got a program for that. And so he got me set up with the OSO out in Murfreesboro. This was when I was living down in Memphis, Tennessee. And so he got me set up with the OSO, the officer selection officer, down in Murfreesboro. And we started the work to become a Marine Corps officer. And it took a while, because I was not in the shape that I needed to be in to be a Marine.
So did they have to put you in like a special program for that? Because I know for the enlisted, they have the delayed entry program where they sort of fine tune you into.
Yeah, no, you're called a poolee. So you're in the pool of people who are thinking about being officers. And I stayed in that pool for the better part of a year. But it's really you doing the work, because on the officer side, a lot of it is them. The whole goal is it's a screening process until you actually get designated as somebody who can be an officer. So all the way before officer candidate school and through officer candidate school, the concept is not we're going to make you into a Marine. The concept is, are you good enough to lead Marines? And so there's programs, or there's groups, like there's group runs, there's workout programs and all the rest of that type of stuff that the officer selection office will attach you to. One of the things that I did that was extremely helpful for me, and I appreciated the camaraderie and the help that I got. The University of Memphis has a Navy ROTC program. And so they do, workouts in the mornings, PT, just like any other unit. And so they allowed those of us who were part of the pool, who were wanting to become officers, to go and work out with the ROTC group. So I was able to get in shape and to work out with those groups. And then I did workouts on my own as well to just kind of improve and get better.
That's actually kind of funny, because when I was going through my A school, I was in the Navy, and I worked out with the Marines because they were the ones that were actually working out, whereas the Navy guys were just kind of like lazy. That is pretty funny, though.
Yeah, it was interesting, because there were 4 ability groups, and what you saw, because it's the Navy ROTC program, so you got the Marines and the Navy all together in the ROTC program. But what you would generally see is that ability group 1, ability group 2 was full of Marines. And then there were the Navy guys who wanted to be SEALs, or wanted to be submariners, or wanted to be nuclear techs. And then ability groups 3 and ability groups 4 were full of a lot of the Navy ROTC regulars. And so it was interesting, because I started out, when I first went, they were like, here, run with ability group 4, we'll see where you are. And then I moved to ability group 3, and then I was making my way up to ability group 2 when I was getting ready to go to officer candidate school, because just the standards are so much different in the Marine Corps. Like for officer candidate school, in order to get in, to get selected, you have to run 3 miles in less than 24 minutes. Now, that's just to get there. What you see is most of the people that are there running in 18, 19, 20 minutes. You might have a 21. I was the guy that was still bottom of the barrel pushing it, because I was doing, I think my best time pre-ship was 22:46, 22:45. So like I was under the 24-minute mark, but I was still not fast. And my best time ever was a 22 minutes. So I never really got fast in long distance, but I was really good. Like I could do my pull-ups, I could do crunches, I could do anything short distance, and I could carry a pack a long way. So I was good that way.
So before we jump into your OCS experience, I do have to ask, why the Marines? Why not the Army?
That's a great question. I actually sat down with my dad, and part of what led me into to revisiting serving in the military was that I wanted to be a better leader. As a teacher, one of the things that I saw that really bothered me was the high attrition rate in the teaching profession. And when you think about it, right, we've got these people who have a passion for helping young people and helping young people to grow. Most teachers that I knew had grown up their entire lives wanting to be teachers. That was what they wanted to do, and they wanted to, help their society, help their community. And the attrition rates were, 50% of teachers leave before 5 years, 80% of teachers leave before 10 years. And what I noticed was a lack of leadership. It wasn't that the teachers weren't good in their professions, that they weren't good dealing with the kids, but what you saw was, from the administrative perspective, administrators in our schools across the country really struggle, because normally you've got an administrative staff of about 4 or 5 administrators tops, and that are running 100 teachers. So if you break that down, you're looking at 20 personnel per administrator, right? And so they're overwhelmed, and they're not really taught a lot how to deal with their peers, how to lead those people, and how to lead them effectively. And something that I noticed, and I've, now with what I do, I see it everywhere. But at the time I saw it and I was like, if this profession where you've got people who love the work, who are comfortable taking a sacrifice and how much money they can make and all the rest of this type of stuff to do this work, and they're leaving at such crazy rates, right? What does the rest of the country look like? What is the rest of the things that we're doing for societal good? What does that look like, and what does leadership look like? And I knew that if I wanted to be able to have the type of impact in society that I wanted to have, because I wanted to be, eventually I was on the track to becoming a superintendent, because I thought that, schools were a place where we can make a positive impact in society. And what I saw was the school system in general didn't have the infrastructure that it needed to be as good as it could be and to impact society. So that was kind of how I went and realized I needed to first understand how the systems work, how we decide our laws, how we design these systems, where our levels of power are in society, and then I also need to be a better leader. And the Marine Corps is the greatest leadership academy in the history of the world. And that was one of the things that, interestingly enough, my father was the person who recommended me going to the Marine Corps. Story that went behind that. He was like, so what do you want from your service? You want to join the military? What do you want to do? And I told him, I was like, I want to be challenged physically, I want to be challenged mentally, and I want to learn how to lead people, large groups of people, to do great things. And so he looked at it, he said, son, here's the deal. If you want to be taken care of, your family taken care of, and have a good life, the Navy and the Air Force, they take care of their officers. They have really good experiences. It'll be great. You can join those. If you want, to be able to see the world and go a lot of different places, the Army is an awesome place. I mean, it's got lots of bases, and you'll get promoted relatively quickly, and you'll get a decent challenge as an Army officer, physically and all the rest of that type of stuff. But if you want to walk into a room full of service people, and everybody in the room know that you've done some stuff and know that you've earned your title, you want to join the Marine Corps. And that was it. I was sold.
All right. So what was OCS like?
Oh, wow. Yeah, so by the time I got to OCS, I was 29 years old. So
What year was that?
This was 2009. I was almost 30. So my birthday's in September. I was going to turn 30 that September. I got selected for Officer Candidate School in March of 2009, and I shipped at the end of May 2009. And so that was an interesting 10 weeks. It was by far the hardest thing that I had ever done physically. But what was more difficult, I think, was the mental strain, because the way OCS is, or Officer Candidate School is set up is it's a screening and evaluating school. Their job is to train you, but also to screen and evaluate whether or not you can lead Marines, whether or not you can be trusted with the privilege of leading Marines. And so the entire time you're aware of the fact that you can go home at any time. If at any point in time they feel like you're not good enough, or you don't cut it, or you're not ready, whatever the case may be, you can go home, and that's the way they do it. And so every day you're under that constant kind of pressure, which for me, right, I was as old as I could be in the program that I was in, so I didn't have a come back next year type of attitude or idea that I would age out. And so then I would have to go into, I'd have to wait till I got out of law school, and then I'd have to go back after I graduated law school. And then I would have to get an age waiver and some other stuff. Like, there was a lot of paperwork, and it was basically, I was either making it this summer or I wasn't making it. And so that, coupled with the fact that I was in they call it a platoon leaders course. So the majority of the people in my platoon were 18, 19, 20-year-old sophomores, juniors in college, who the reason that they do this course is because they can get through and get screened, and then when they graduate, they can commission. It's almost like a delayed entry program. And so I'm in the age cohort of some of the most in shape people. But I'm on the upper end of that cohort, and I'm not great at distance running. Now, I was in shape for I was in the top of my platoon in everything we did that was short. So if it was the obstacle course, if it was the short, all the martial arts stuff, all the rest of that type of stuff, I had been a martial artist for, at that time, about 10 years. So anything that we were doing in those realms, I was good. But all of the stuff that was distance and endurance, I wasn't. Like I said, I ran a 22:46, not super fast. Like, don't get me wrong, we're running 15 mile pace, but nonetheless, when you got guys that are running 19-minute 3 miles and 18-minute, one guy in our platoon used to run cross country in college, and he ran like a 16:20 3 mile. It was just stupid, right? And so you got that big a gap. So OCS was a lot of, for me, it was physically challenging, and the physical challenge of it and the fact that it wasn't easy physically for me created more of a mental challenge.
And did you feel like pressured to perform well with all these, relative kids?
There was definitely a lot of kind of, and Malcolm Gladwell and David and Goliath calls it relative deprivation, right? So even though I was fast comparatively to, the other 29-year-olds my age, right, or in the country, in this group, I was one of the worst runners. Now, interestingly enough, I wasn't the worst runner. I was one of the worst runners. But what it did is it put me into a position where I wasn't assured of victory, quote unquote. I wasn't assured. I didn't know that I was going to make it. I actually had to work to make it. I had to earn it. And that was something that was new to me from that perspective, because I had never challenged myself up until that point at that level, right? I had done martial arts. I had been a national champion in martial arts, but in my arena generally, like, it was one of those types of things where I was more athletic, more coordinated, better situated than a lot of the people that I went up against. So I went into it knowing that I was good and I was going to make it. And what was interesting here was I knew how to lead. I knew how to be successful at doing things. So all of I had one of the highest GPAs in the platoon, because you got graded on academics, on leadership, and on physical fitness, right? Leadership and academics, I never had a problem about, never had to think about. But there were some physical fitness challenges that I wasn't sure that I was going to make. And that was one of the things that was interesting. And that was the first time that I had been involved in something where I wasn't sure if I was good enough. And so, that was stressful. But it was, on the flip side of it, it was one of the best things that happened to me, because going through that experience, right, it shows you what you can do and how you can dig deep and how you can work harder and to be better. And that's what I was able to do.
So what all does OCS consist of? Are you staying in a barracks while you're doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Are you?
OCS is basically, a lot of people, when you look at recruit training, right, OCS is a little bit different than recruit training in that every weekend after the first 3 weeks, you get 24-hour period of liberty. Whereas in recruit training, there's no liberty for the entire 13 weeks that they're in, right? But the interesting thing about that is that's a test. It's not designed as free time. It's actually a test. And there's a number of people who got sent home because they would go out and get drunk on liberty and then come back later. They would do all the stuff and so the libo period is actually a test to see how you handle freedom, right? And it's so crazy how everything is set up. So you stay in a barracks, you have a squad bay with your platoon, and you have to field day every Sunday when you come back from libo, just like, everything else. And we clean everything. We wake up, you muster just like everybody, you get online and do your accountability. Everybody gets out the door. It's the same thing. I was actually in charge of, my squad was in charge of the head. So every night, basically every morning, 04:30, right? Muster was at 05, so 04:30, 04 to 04:30, we were up cleaning the head, making sure that it looked good, making sure it was clean, and getting everybody through. And then we'd have to, when we left the house, we'd have to make sure that nobody had left anything as well. So we did that every day for the entire time. And you've got classes during the day, so you're marching to class and taking classes, learning how to be, learning the basics of what it is to be a Marine, learning the basics of the M4, the M16 A4 service weapon, and you're doing everything to learn how to be a Marine, but then you're also going through, and we've got PT multiple times a day. You've got field ops, so we would go out to the field a number of various times throughout the 10-week period. You've got humps, so we had, I want to say 3 or 4 humps that we had to do throughout the time. So you build progressively. We did a 3-mile, 6-mile, 9-mile, and then I think we finish up with a 12-mile.
So a hump, that's a backpacking.
Right.
Hike,
So
right?
you got to pack. Then I think in OCS it was 45 to 75 pounds or something like that. And you go on these excursions where you're walking through the woods, up hills, and all the rest of that type of stuff. What else did we do? You learn martial arts. The Marine Corps martial arts program, you wind up learning the beginning phases of that. And it's just basic training to see how you do throughout the training. But there's also a lot of tests that are out there. So there's leadership exams. So after you've done, a march, or after you've gone out and done PT and things of that nature, then you're tested on how you lead a group of people through certain things. You're given billets or jobs during that time. So everything from platoon sergeant on down in a platoon. So you rotate through being fire team leaders, you rotate through being squad leaders, and you're evaluated on your leadership in those roles during that period of time. Like I said, the way that the Marine Corps has it set up is phenomenal for being able to spot and evaluate those people who have the talents to become Marine Corps officers. But the funny part about it is a lot of people don't realize that's the first part. So you go through 10 weeks of screening and evaluation, and once you make it, then you commission. Or, if you haven't graduated college, you wait until you graduate college and then you commission. But then the Marine Corps actually trains you how to be an officer, and that's the basic school, which is 6 months of similarly styled training where you get a bunch of lieutenants in a company, and we're in Quantico, Virginia again, and you're going through and you're learning everything that it is to be a Marine Corps officer. It's not like a number of the other different branches have. You go straight to you go through, like in the Navy, they have what's called Officer Development School, which is about 6 weeks, I believe, of learning how to be an officer, understanding what it is to be an officer, and then they go straight to Naval Justice School, which is their job specific thing if you're in the legal profession. Yeah. And so the Marine Corps is different. The idea in the Marine Corps is you're an officer first. So it doesn't matter if you're a pilot, if you're a lawyer, if you're a supply guy, if you're a logistician, whatever your job is going to be in the Marine Corps, that's great. You're an officer. You're a platoon commander. And so for the first 9 months, if you go straight through for the first 9 months of your training, you're not doing anything job specific. You're doing Marine Corps platoon commander specific training. And so that's the 10 weeks. You're doing the initial portion, and then you go through 6 months of going to class, learning how to do everything from calling the CAS evac to set up a defense to offensive structures to learning how to flank an enemy, to all of the different things that we do. Attack an objective, call in calls for fire, and everything that a Marine Corps platoon commander would need to do in the field of battle. So
even though you weren't, logically you were probably never going to see the field going into the legal profession that you did. They still wanted to train you to be able to do it if they needed you.
Exactly, because the ethos of the Marine Corps is every Marine is a rifleman, every Marine Corps officer is a platoon commander. In the Army and the Navy, the Air Force, they have what's called the JAG Corps, and so that's really a professional designation. It's separate and it's a different type of an officer.
Yeah.
In the Marine Corps, you have the Legal Support Services section, and you have judge advocates who are Marine Corps officers, but they're also lawyers. So for example, during my Marine Corps career, I was able to be a company commander, but I was a lawyer. And that's because as a lawyer, I can do any billet, any job that's an open source job or a job that's for any officer in the Marine Corps, then we're able to do that because we have the same training, because we have the same background, because the way the Marine Corps looks at it is, it doesn't matter what your job is, this is what your real job is.
Yeah. It's a good way to do things, honestly.
Yeah, I loved it. That was another reason why I joined the Marine Corps, why I picked the Marine Corps as the branch to serve in, because what I didn't want was to just be a lawyer in a uniform.
Yeah.
The reason I wanted to serve in the military, I also wanted the knowledge and the understanding of how to defend my neighborhood, how to defend my family, how to defend and be part of, right? If anything was to ever happen and someone was invading over here, I didn't want to be like, I was in the military, but I don't know how to, like that wouldn't.
I'm a lawyer.
Exactly, right? Like that wasn't my goal. And so joining the Marine Corps and going through that training, like I know how to dig a fighting hole. I'm an expert on the rifle and on the pistol. Like I can shoot and I can do those things. I understand all of the mechanisms of war to the level that, you know, a Marine Corps officer needs to understand them. Now, as I'm not anywhere near as skilled as my infantry officer brethren who go through another 9 weeks of super grueling training to learn how to truly lead an infantry platoon in some of the worst things that you can think of, right? But the one thing that I love about Marine Corps training is that you don't get to say, I'm just a lawyer.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're like, so get your pack on and let's go.
So those 6 months, did you also have to struggle physically, or were you sort of catching up at that
It was
point?
less of a struggle physically. I won't say that it wasn't a struggle physically, but it was one of those things where, and it was interesting because this was actually, mine was split, because basically the way the contract works is I was going into law school when I commissioned. And so I would go on active duty during the summers, but I was in law school during the years. So I was 3 years later and 1 knee surgery later when I went to the basic school. And so there were things that I had to deal with because I was getting older. So I had Achilles tendonitis while I was there. I had rolled an ankle, and so I had some injuries to deal with. But what was interesting was everybody wound up getting injured sometime over that 6-month period. Everybody had to deal with injuries. Everybody had to deal with being tired, pulling muscles, all the rest of that type of stuff. So physically, I knew I could do the work, and it wasn't something where I was ever worried about not passing anymore. I knew that I could do it. What was interesting about it was TBS, whereas OCS is really a sprint. It's you just go. The basic school is more a marathon. And so you're really trying to figure out how to make it through this entire period. So you can't just go as hard as you can go. You have to take care of your body. You have to learn when to give and when to relax, when to kind of let other people lead, when you've got to step up and when you've got to lead. And so the basic school was a physical test, but it was a different test because, I had a wife and I had 2 kids at the time. And so you're living a little bit of a different life than the single bachelor Marines who were there just, right, because you're living in the barracks, but then you also have your family and they want to see you. But then we go, we're in the field for a week at a time. So no communication, no talking, no texting, no any of the rest of that. And so you got to deal with then when you come back, there are people that are wanting to talk to you and they're missing you and all the rest of that type of stuff. So you get that experience. It was a very interesting experience because again, being older, you're at a different life experience than a lot of the people that you're going through it with, even though you're having the same curricular experiences that they're having.
Yeah. So jumping back a little bit, you said you were active duty during the summers while you were in school.
Mm-hmm.
What were you doing during those summers?
I would go, and it was basically high-profile internships or low-profile internships. I would work in for 2 years, I worked in the legal support services sections at Quantico. And so I was at the University of Illinois for law school, but we would go out to Quantico, Virginia, and we would work. The first year I worked in the staff judge advocate's office, and so the staff judge advocate is basically the lawyer for the base. He or she does consultations with the base commander and does the rewrites for any of the base orders that are going out and all those different types of things, make sure that everything's good. But then they also run the litigation shop, so criminal defense, and at least at that time. And there was a reorganization in 2010. So this is 2009, 2010. After my summer in 2010, there was a reorganization, and they changed a little bit how things worked. But at that time, the base SJA owned litigation, owned civil law, so understanding, administrative stuff, ethics stuff, all the rest of that. Long story short, I did my internship there. I spent a little time doing civil law work, so I did a lot of researching and writing briefs, right? One of the things that I did a brief on, which was really interesting at the time, was the posse comitatus law. And for those that don't know, posse comitatus is the law that talks about what the U.S. military can do on U.S. soil. Because the idea is that the military is created to defend America against foreign enemies, right? And that policing powers are not relegated to the military. Policing powers are designated to the FBI, the Coast Guard, the local municipalities for policing. And so one of the things that's interesting is you have military bases on federal land, but in the middle of the United States, in the continental U.S. So what are the rights, and what are where does the line in between what a base commander can do to defend his base and the people that live on the base and things like that, and where does the jurisdiction begin for whatever the municipality is? And because at the time we had a shooter or a potential shooter, there was a guy that had been spotted kind of scoping in around the housing area who had a rifle, but he was outside the gate, so technically he was not on the base.
Yeah.
And so there was a question of what can we do? Can the MPs go and detain him? And then wait for local LEOs, law enforcement officers, to come in? What was that? And so I wound up doing the research on that and sending that up through the chain to the base commander.
Out of curiosity, are you able to talk about what could you guys do in that situation?
Yeah, well, I can talk about now. I'll caveat that with this was almost 10 years ago, so laws have changed, things are different. At the time, what we came down to was that the self-defense powers allow for the base commander and basically the extension of the base commander, the provost marshal's office, the military police, to go and to act in defense. So if they think that there's a threat or something like that, they have a reasonable threat, they can go ahead and detain. They can't arrest the person, but they can work with local law enforcement to then call local law enforcement in, and then they would take jurisdiction of that person and do whatever needs to happen with that. But if there's an imminent threat, then you don't have to call the police and wait for them to get there before you do anything. That's the idea. That's good. Yeah, it made me feel a lot safer because we were actually, we weren't living on base during the time, but my wife was always on base, going to the commissary and working out at the gym, doing stuff like that with the kids. And so it was something that it was definitely affected me. And then plus when I lived on base, when we were stationed in Camp Lejeune, we lived on base the entire time. And so that was really important to know.
Yeah. So when you were going to law school, were you receiving BAH? Were you receiving a paycheck?
Okay, so no. The way that the system was set up was I was basically in active ready reserve during the year. And so it was just like any reservist that once you get out and you execute EAS orders, you're technically still in the Marine Corps for, and still in the Navy, the Army for, whatever the length of your contract is. So if we go to war, you can get called back, all the rest of that. But you're not receiving any benefits, any services, anything like that. So while I was in law school, I was basically, I paid for law school. The Marine Corps didn't pay for it. And I did, I was a law student basically by day. I still worked out with and helped with the local OSO's office, the officer selection officer. And, you know, I would run morning workouts for the poolies, people who wanted to become Marines, and I would help them with different local events. But for the most part, I was a law student during the year. And then during the summer, I would execute orders. We would move out to Quantico. I would go and do the work that I was going to be doing. Basically, it was pre-training, on-the-job training, so that when you get to the fleet, you actually hit the ground running. And during that period of time, I was getting paid.
Okay. So that must have been kind of a strain on your family, huh?
Yeah, it was definitely it was one of those things that we had prepared for, but it was. Looking back, I can see a number of different ways that I could have done it differently, which would have been better financially for my family.
Yeah. Especially the moving back and forth had to be kind of rough, huh?
Oh yeah, it was rough, but at the same time, it was an adventure. So it was cool. My kids got to, because my son was born. He actually never made those trips, but my daughter, she got to live in Virginia. It was basically a vacation, right? It was a 2-month vacation. It was a real strain for my wife because we would move and we were up and then we would go for 2 months and then we'd move back. And so she would lose touch with friends and all the rest of this. And plus, basically, we would move so that I could go to work all day and she could be at home with my daughter. So she had to basically figure out what she was going to do for the day, which is a lot easier around where you're living than it is when you move to this new place where you don't know anybody.
Yeah. So you did that for 3 years, and
Yeah.
then what was your first full-time station?
Right. So after we did that for law school, I got orders to the basic school. So that was the 6 months, and that's Quantico, and that's when we moved to Quantico, Virginia for 6 months, and went through the whole basic school process. After that, we went to Norfolk, Virginia. Not Norfolk, Virginia. We went to Newport, Rhode Island for Naval Justice School. And then after that, we were stationed permanently in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, right outside of Wilmington.
Okay. So how long was Naval Justice School, and what was that like?
Okay, so Naval Justice School was about 9 weeks. And it was a great time just because, like, when you go through 6 months of Marine Corps training, like, Naval Justice School was like professional school. There was a couple of things. We did a morning run every Thursday morning. It's called Pain Before Breakfast, which was a lot of fun. It's a 5-mile run. You go out and you run along the coastline, and then we double back and come back to base. The big thing about that run, if it was like when it was warm, it was great. But of course, I went to Naval Justice School. We started in October, finished in December. So toward the end of the 9 weeks, it was crazy. You'd have to bundle up and have your gloves and your hat and your gaiter and everything. Yeah, in Rhode Island, it was, and you're right off the water. So like wind, and like there were times where you literally were just like kind of trying to see the person in front of you to figure out where you were running. But that was pretty much the extent of physical gruelingness of Naval Justice School. A lot of it is really teaching you how to go through all the facets of being a lawyer in the naval services. So we had Coast Guard lawyers there, we had Navy lawyers, and then we had a contingent of Marine lawyers there as well. And that was where you really got to see the difference between kind of what it's like to be a lawyer in the Marine Corps and what it's like to be a lawyer in other services. Like I said, for the Navy, the people that we were in class with had been in, I want to say, maybe 10 weeks. And then they were in Naval Justice School, and then they were getting ready to go and get assigned to wherever they were assigned. The people that were in the Coast Guard with us had been in maybe 6 months, and many of them less than that. And then they were doing the same thing. And the average time in service for the people that were in the Marine cohort was like 18 months.
Wow.
Right. And
that's a big difference.
Right. And all of us had been on active duty at least 6 months. Some were like kind of Mustangs, me-steps. People had been in the enlisted, gone to college, and then joined the officer corps. We also had a major who was an aviator who was changing over to his designation to become a lawyer now. And so he had been in the Marine Corps for already 10 years before he made that change. And so the Marine cohort was definitely had done a lot, not done a lot more, had been in a lot longer, and so it was an interesting dynamic.
So this was 2012, right?
This was 2013.
Okay.
The end of 2013. Yeah. So I spent. This is the other thing about the basic school, because of the way that everything works. You've got to get a spot in a class, and those spots fill up. And so, because as a lawyer, in order to get to earn your spot in the class, you have to pass the bar. Otherwise, you don't get your law designation. You then just go in as kind of general population. So, graduate in May of 2012. Take the bar in October of 2012. No, take the bar in August of 2012. And then you get your results in October. So you're not eligible for a slot until October. So there's 4 months after I graduated, 5 months after I graduated, where you're kind of in limbo. Luckily, I wound up getting selected as the Dean's Fellow at the college. So basically, I graduated and worked directly for the Dean of the College of Law, and basically worked on a lot of special projects. We worked to develop a mentorship program between senior alumni, people who had graduated 6 or more years ago and had been practicing law for that time, and then recent graduates, those who had 3 or less years out of school. So we developed that program while I was there. I did a number of research projects. I did some work on how to make the College of Law recruiting process more attractive for diverse applicants. And then I did some work as well doing helping 1L students, beginning law students, to figure out what it is they want to do and helping with their path. So that was some work I did with the career development office as well.
Yeah. Did you see a lot of diversity in the officer programs, or was that really something you wanted to jumpstart?
Right. Well, so this was for law school, but one of the things that you see generally in these in programs that are of higher quality, or that have high screening processes, right? The legal profession, in order to get into law school, it's a very high bar. You got to have good grades. You got to have a good LSAT score, legal scholastic aptitude test score. Same thing with the Marine Corps. There's high standards, and so getting there is difficult. And one of the things that is interesting when you look at the dynamics of our society, right? Because of the fact that you don't have a lot of people who make it through, right? I'm an African-American male. There are not a lot of African-American males that graduate college. There's a chunk, but proportionately not a tremendous amount, right? So once you can reach that level, once I can graduate college as an African-American male, what I represent to organizations who are looking for the perspective of African-American males is considerably more valuable as an, vis-a-vis individual to individual than my counterparts, Caucasian males, women, etc. The main reason why is because I'm so much less likely to be there.
Yeah.
So if you want the African-American male perspective, there's a smaller pool of people that you can go to that are qualified to be what you're doing, and they can do it. And so what that does is it means that you actually have to, and I'll use the term pay more, but it's not really pay more, but there has to be more value. There has to be more welcomingness. There has to be more where I can see myself being welcomed into that society. Like, as an African-American male graduating high school, or when I had my credentials, having a master's degree and going to college, I wasn't going to go someplace where I had to feel like I needed to struggle to fit in. I wasn't going to go someplace where I felt like I was going to have to do more work than I had already done to get to the place where I was, because that was work that you have to do in every step along the way. Because it's like college isn't set up where it's basically it's a play. College isn't set up in a way that says, we understand your experience and come on, it's going to be just like everybody else's experience here. You go to a lot of these places, and I mean, I've had this experience all growing up, and it's not a bad thing. It's not a complaint thing. It's just a reality thing, right? If you've been stationed overseas, you know how it is. When you're an American in Japan, there's a different feeling. You don't feel less than, but you know that it's different.
Yeah, you stick out.
Right, you stick out, and people speak a language that you don't speak, and they understand things and can tell jokes and laugh, and there's a different sense of ease that they have with belonging.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's not that, but they treat you nice. They say hello. Like that. It's not like they treat you bad, but you understand that it's not necessarily your group.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things that I understood growing up. I was one of, if not a couple. Generally, I was the one black kid in my class, in every AP classes in high school, in college, in graduate school, going through. And so you start to understand that experience, and that's something where you get to a point where you're like, I want to have an experience where I don't have to feel like the odd person out. I don't have to feel like this. And the schools that create that type of an environment that can be more diverse, and the programs that create those types of environments are more appealing to that small group of people who are now qualified to go there. And so you see a lot of schools really clamoring for the small groups of people who are there, because it's a perspective that's needed. It's a perspective, and that goes with any minority. When you look at Native Americans, again, another minority that is disproportionately represented on the low end in higher education. Women used to be, and has now in just the last 20 years really gotten to the point where women are represented and even overrepresented in higher education. But for so long, women were underrepresented in professions and in professional education. So anyway, that whole study that I was doing was really on how do we show people, and how do we make ourselves more welcoming, more appealing to those groups that we want to attract? Because the idea is that all the studies have shown the more diverse opinions that you have in an educational setting, the better the educational experience. And that's not diversity just on the basis of color. That's diversity of experiences. That's diversity of life challenges. That's the diversity of how people have built up their resiliency to be where they are.
Yeah.
And being able to do that and understand that, you have to learn to attract those people who have diverse experiences. But there's an interesting thing. When you're looking for diverse experiences, you're looking for things that are outside of the norm. But if you're presenting everything that is the norm, you're not attracting the people that are outside of the norm. And so there's this kind of dichotomy that goes on there. And that's what I worked on during that kind of inter-period while I was Dean's Fellow.
Yeah, okay.
And so we used to have a lot of talks about this in the Marine Corps as well. When I was in the basic school, 275 officers, 8 black officers.
Wow.
Right. And you would see, and it was interesting, we were aware, like you'd see just different things, like we get together and there'd be the 8 black, maybe it'd be 6 of us or 5 of us, but there'd be a group of black officers talking, and then, you'd get looks like, what they talking about? What's going on? Right? And so every once in a while we do stuff, and just for fun, we grab somebody, like, hey, you come here. We need to integrate this circle so people stop looking at us. And so we grab some of our friends, because it was never that we got together and were like, we're going to exclude people, but we would just get together, start talking. And one of the things that we got to see was we had to make it more comfortable for our white friends to be part of the group as well. So that's what we would intentionally pull people over and be like, hey, come here, let's talk. Let's be over here to integrate it, because it looks weird. And not weird, you would feel the eyes go to the one group. Now, there'd be a group of all white people standing over here and a group of all white people standing over here, and nobody's paying attention. But when the group of all black people got together, it was like, I wonder what they're talking about.
Did you see that with any other ethnicities? Were there like groups of Filipinos?
There were groups of, there were other ethnicities, but there were a lot less. So normally, like there were some Latinos that were in our group, and there were some Arab descendants, Middle Eastern descendants that were in our group. There were some Asian descendants that were in our group as well, but there were onesies and twosies kind of.
Okay.
And normally what was interesting was that minority group would be all of the above.
Yeah.
But we would know, you would just notice the difference in how those groups, anytime if it was a group of minorities that were together, you could see the difference. And sometimes it was just pure curiosity, but nonetheless, it was interesting to see that, because you'd see a group of 15 white people talking, and the curiosity wasn't the same, the interest, none of that was the same. And it wasn't nefarious, it wasn't anything malicious, it wasn't anything bad, it was just different. And you could notice it, and those are the types of things, those are the subtle cues that you notice about not being part of the norm, not being part of the regular. And I mean, I think the numbers right now, African American officers make up, I want to say, about 2% of the Marine Corps officer corps.
Wow.
And the numbers are a lot higher in the enlisted ranks, but a lot of the reason for African American officers not making up a large portion of the Marine Corps the Marine Corps officer corps has nothing to do with kind of traditional discrimination or anything like that. But if you look at the system for recruitment of officers in the Marine Corps, what you see is that there are no, like one of my, case in point, one of the guys that was in my platoon was a former Marine. He had been in the Marine Corps 10 years. He was a staff sergeant. He went to Howard, historically black college and university. In order to be part of his officer selection office pool, he had to go and travel over to Georgetown because that's where the office was and that's where the majority of everybody worked. And so there was no officer selection effort at Howard University, which, if you think about it, right, if you're recruiting African American males, you're going to have a higher propensity to get African American males who are qualified to become Marine Corps officers at Howard University, which is a historically black college and university, than at Georgetown University.
Yeah.
Right? But at the end of the day, that was one of the things that he had to deal with. And if you look in Atlanta, there isn't a officer selection office that caters specifically to Morehouse and, you know, the Atlanta and all of the different historically black colleges and universities in that area. In the recruiting mindset, they'll recruit an area, and generally, right, if you look at the system, people recruit where they're comfortable. If the majority of officer selection officers are white, then they're going to recruit in areas where they're comfortable with the people, which are majority white, and every once in a while you'll get a black person that'll trickle through. Whereas, so there's a whole bunch of kind of that process in that system. And don't get me wrong, like the Marine Corps is doing a good job at moving it forward. One of my friends, former middle linebacker at Marshall University, infantry officer, African American male infantry officer, was an officer selection officer for 3 years, and he was in the Kent State, Ohio region. And so, you know, he was doing more to do that, and just having more diverse faces and all those different types of things. But it's ultimately, I think that diversity is a lot more difficult than people give it credit for. And because what it requires is for people to do and to step outside of their comfort zone on the regular, which is not a normal behavior.
Yeah. So did you ever have a lot of struggles with that, or did you sort of, because of your background, fit in,
Yeah,
so to speak?
Fitting in was easy. And that's one of the things that I love about the Marine Corps. Race, color, all the rest of that type of stuff doesn't really matter. It's not, even with those subtleties and those things that we talked about, everybody was awesome, amazing. You got people from the north, you got people from the south, you got people from the west and the east, and it didn't matter. We were all Marines, right? We all bleed green, and so that was the basic idea. And so there's a camaraderie and there's an esprit de corps that is developed through that training, through that time that you spend in the field with each other and learning about each other. And so I want to be clear in that description. One of the reasons that the Marine Corps is so amazing is because of the fact that in the culture, it's not allowed for you to be thought of based off of where you come from.
Yeah.
Right? Like, where you come from is a component of who you are as a Marine, but you're a Marine. That's the most important component of who you are. And that's the thing that you remember, that we follow, we pay attention to honor, courage, and commitment, that we are this group, Semper Fidelis, right? Always faithful to one another. And that's more important than any of the other stuff. And that was one of the things that was so liberating about being a Marine Corps officer, that you never had to really overcome racism and those, like, you would literally be laughed at if you harbored those kind of ideas. Like, people like, what are you talking about? Like, it's Marine. Like, are you a Marine or are you not a Marine? Like, you want to be a racist? Go ahead and be a racist. But like, are you going to be a Marine or you cannot be a Marine? And that was the thing that for me was, and that was the experience that I had with my, you know, even 20 years before with my dad in the Army. It was the same thing. A lot of his best friends were white. And we used to hang out, and he played semi-pro football when we were in Germany. It was a lot of fun. And you didn't get a sense of you're different. You got a sense of soldier. That was the way that it worked. And so But coming from society, that's one of the things that you always notice the subtleties, but I love the fact that in the Marine Corps, what I got to see often was what society looks like when people don't pay attention to that.
That's awesome. It's a really good thing to hear. I'm glad that that's true for all the branches.
Yeah.
And, you know, that definitely holds true with the Navy too.
Mm-hmm.
So you do your Naval Justice School, and then you
Mm-hmm.
got sent back to Quantico, you said?
Yeah. Well, no, after Naval Justice School, I went down to Camp Lejeune.
Okay.
So then I linked up and I was attached to the Defense Services Office East, which is the Eastern region. So Legal Support Services Section East, which is basically the legal support services are broken up into 4 regions in the Marine Corps. You've got the National Capital Region, which deals with Headquarters Marine Corps, Quantico, and everything in kind of the DMV, if you would. And then you've got Legal Support Service Section East, which is headquartered at Camp Lejeune, but deals with Parris Island and Marine Corps Logistics Base Albany and everything that all the little kind of detachments and everything we've got in the southern and southeastern region. Then you've got Marine Corps, or you got LSSS West, which deals with everything kind of west of the Mississippi, and then you've got the Pacific region, LSSS, that deals with everything that is Japan, Iwakuni, Camp Butler, and all of the detachments that are out in the Pacific region.
So did you choose this station, or were you given this station?
Yes. So I was voluntold. I went and actually my first choice was to be stationed in Japan. So kind of I went Japan, Pendleton, Hawaii, and then Lejeune was my number 4. But I got Lejeune, and I think one of the main reasons, my daughter has asthma, and one of the things that they look at when they're deciding where they're going to station you is with your dependents, they have to station you somewhere where your dependents can get care. And in Iwakuni, there isn't an asthma care facility that's feasible, and so I couldn't get stationed there, so they sent me to Camp Lejeune. And when I was there, and I loved it, it was a great experience. And it's interesting because although I had wanted other experiences, this was one of the experiences that for me really solidified what the Marine Corps means and being able to see the camaraderie. Because one of the things about Camp Lejeune specifically is the surrounding community has so many veterans and so many people who still love the Marine Corps, have retired or who are served and just stayed around. And plus also Camp Johnson, which when I was a company commander, a couple of my units were on Camp Johnson, was the site of the Montford Point Marines, which were the first African-American Marines to train in the Marine Corps. So it was from a historical perspective, it was a really cool moment.
I'll bet. Did you have, how long were you there?
So I was there from December of 2013 to October of 2017, so almost a full 4 years.
Okay. And what were you doing at that time?
Okay, so the first billet that I had, I was a defense counsel. So in the Marine Corps, if you're alleged to have committed a crime, if you're indicted of anything, you get access to a Marine Corps lawyer. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is the fact that Marines are defended by Marines. And because we believe the idea that you're innocent until proven guilty, and the allegations are just that. They're what people think may have happened. They're not what exactly happened. And so the Defense Services Office, and actually that Defense Services Office East is the busiest defense shop in the Marine Corps. We run through more cases than any other defense shop in the Marine Corps. And that was, at least for the 4 years that I was there, that was the busiest shop during the time. And I spent 2 years in that post, and we defended Marines and sailors from allegations of wrongdoing. There were a number, and I always look at it as we didn't just defend people and say, okay, well, you're definitely innocent. That's definitely the case. We also helped to broker the deals that were in the best interests of both parties, of the service member and of the Marine Corps, because there were a number of my clients. I had over 200 clients that I advised while I was a defense counsel. I had over 70 that were my individual clients, ranging from everything from administrative separation or being fired from the Marine Corps, if you would, all the way up to general court-martial felony level offenses. And so throughout the time that I was there were a number of my clients that were guilty of what they had been accused of. And in those cases, what I did is I helped them to navigate the process to get them the best situation for them so that they were able to admit their guilt, to deal with the consequences thereof, but then to also move on with their lives and be re-entered back into society as productive, contributing citizens. I took that role very seriously as well because, like we said, I'm a Marine Corps officer first, right? And as a Marine Corps officer, my job is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. The goal is to make sure that our systems are working so that our citizens can be as productive as possible, right? So as a defense counsel, one of the things that I was able to do, and you get a special kind of place and role because you're the person that people can talk to and tell you all their dirt, everything that they did. And so I got to know where my clients were and what they were struggling with. And so I would be able to give them recommendations for help. I would be able to give them recommendations for how to move on with their lives after the fact. A lot of my clients, especially the ones that were dealing with getting fired, not so much on the criminal side, they were getting fired because of behavioral issues, right? Some of them were getting fired because, like, I had one client who was in a drug rehab program. He had been doing drugs, but he had been doing drugs because of the fact that he was dealing with PTSD. And he was having trouble sleeping and all the rest of it. So he was self-diagnosing and self-medicating, which wasn't the system that he should have followed. But everything about his performance as a Marine, everything about what he did was honorable. He had served in combat. And so it was trying to figure out how to deal with these people who, like the thing that I always prided myself on and the thing that I always remembered was every one of my clients had stood on the yellow footprints, raised their right hand and said, "I swear to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States," and were even willing to give their lives to do so. So we weren't dealing with people who were morally decrepit and corrupt. We were dealing with people who were good people who made bad choices, who were good people who were dealing with dealing with some demons. And so that was something that I liked about the job, is that we got to work. I was an attorney and counselor at law, and I got to help people to make the transition that they needed to make. Maybe you don't need to be a Marine, that's true, but you're not a horrible person. Let's get you back into society so that you're not, continuing to do the same things that you're doing. But then I also prided myself on the fact that I got to protect a number of people who were innocent and who had been accused of horrible things who they hadn't done it. And so one of the things that I love about that time, I held it was 70%, and it dropped in the end of my career. But it was when I left defense, I was at 70% acquittal. So I took 10 cases to trial at the time, and 7 of them wound up with acquittals. That turned into, I got pulled onto another case later on in my career, and so that wound up being a guilty verdict. But even with the 4 that were guilty, they were necessarily guilty. Like that case the last case that I took, he had already admitted to one of the crimes on the charge sheet. It was the other 5 that they had put on there that we were like, nah, he didn't do that. And they were trying to end his career and send him to jail for 9 years and all the rest of this type of stuff. And it was like, no, he did this. He said he did this. We're gonna go ahead and defend all this other stuff because that's crazy. And at the end of the day, he got convicted for what we said he did. He wound up being reduced in rank from an E6 to an E5, and he got a reprimand.
Wow.
Right.
That's a very drastic difference there.
Right, because we were at felony level criminal court. Like I said, they were trying to put him away for 9 years.
Wow. So you said you also defended sailors?
Yeah, I defended sailors. I had a couple of sailors that I defended. One was a felony case, actually, and this was a case that was really tough for me because it was a sexual assault case. And one of the interesting things about the case was there were problems with the case from the beginning. The NCIS went back and re-interviewed the complaining witness to see, because there was text messages and there was communications back and forth between them that didn't jive with the story that she had told. And there was already problems. There were, she had told this story a year after the alleged incident, and then we went to trial a year after that. And there were a number of different issues that went to do with that. And I won't go into all of the issues, but one of the things that was really difficult in this trial for me was like, and with sexual assault trials in general, I'm a martial arts instructor as well. I teach women empowered women self-defense classes. I work with a lot of survivors of sexual assault. I consider myself an advocate and an ally for women who have had to deal with sexual assault. One of the interesting things about being on the defense side is you get to see the problems that go into this area. And I've talked a lot in my legal circles about the fact that I don't think that in most cases when we're dealing with sexual assault, I don't think that criminal court is the appropriate forum to deal with the issue. And one of the main reasons why is because the nature of the facts and the nature of the cases, it's a very hard case. Even if you have a legitimate sexual assault, it's a very hard case to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law, because there's so much that has to do with sexual assault that is you're listening to two people who were in a situation tell different stories about what happened in the situation. And as a third party who wasn't there, you have to make judgments about what happened and what didn't happen. And credibility determinations are very difficult. It puts us in a place that makes it very difficult for the third party to move forward. And so what you wind up is having this skewed perception where women have actually been violated, women have actually had, women and men have actually had things happen to them that they didn't want to happen to them. But because of the fact that the bar is so high for them to be able to convince a third party, they generally wind up, the success rates in sexual assault cases are something like, the conviction rates are something like 6 or 7%.
Yeah.
Right? And it's because it's such a difficult inquiry, not because, and I've been on both sides of it. Like I said, I was a defense counsel. I was also a company commander and sat in conversations where we had to decide whether or not to prosecute sexual assault allegations and how those cases were going to go. I've been on both sides of that table. I've dealt with, as an ally, with assault survivors. And so I've always been more of the opinion that in cases like that, the court system of criminal court is not a great place to try those cases because the system isn't set up for it. The system is set up, and intentionally so, right? We as a society say, we're going to take away your freedom, we're going to take away your possibly, potentially, we might take away your life, we'll definitely take away your liberty and your right to pursue happiness.
Yeah.
Right? That we put a high bar on that because those are enshrined in our Constitution. And the level of credibility and the level of evidence that we need to say, yes, we're going to do that is relatively high. We have another court system, which is a tort court system, which basically is a person to person, you have wronged me and I want redress of that wrong, I've been damaged, that has a lower bar. In most states, it's a preponderance of the evidence. It's 51% to 49%. If we think you did it, then you can be convicted, or not convicted, you can, the plaintiff can win and be awarded damages. And that way they can have that kind of vindication from society saying, yes, you've done this, and I can now get monetary recompense from you in that vein. But I think that one of the other things that we need to do in our system is focus a lot more on support and aiding survivors in overcoming the incident. But I say all that as kind of prologue to, I look at this issue from a lot of different angles. And when I was as a defense counsel, however, I was in a situation where my client had been accused, and in my opinion had been falsely accused of sexually assaulting someone. And the crazy thing about that case was, like I said, everything in the system, the prosecution team was coming to me with deals trying to get us to just agree that he was in the barracks when he shouldn't have been in the barracks, so it could be something easy to get away, because they weren't wanting to prosecute this case because they were like, we don't even believe that it happened, but we have to prosecute it because the way that the laws had changed and the way that things went, it had to go forward.
Yeah.
And so it was really difficult because basically my client was facing sexual assault charges, being a registered sex offender for the rest of his life, right? All of those different types of things. And he was maintaining his innocence. I believed he was innocent, but we had gotten it to the point where he could have gotten a slap on the wrist for something that didn't have anything to do with sexual assault, and it wouldn't even really be on his record. But he was like, no, I want to go to court. she's lying on me, she's besmirched me, I want vindication. And so now I'm in a place where I'm taking a case to trial that could go the wrong way.
Yeah.
And like, so it was, I mean, the level of stress was crazy, because you never know what what might happen, what people might say. And I've seen cases that should have been won get lost over and over and over again, right? So ultimately he wound up being acquitted of all charges. But that was possibly one of the most stressful things that I had to do as a defense counsel, because you have somebody who's legitimately innocent, who's facing tremendous consequences. And because the conviction alone, like, triggers all of these things. Even if he serves no jail time, he's a registered sex offender. There's certain places he can't live, certain things he can't do, all the rest of that. But he wound up being acquitted. So that was a really good experience. I had a number of other cases kind of that were of that level. I had one Marine who had been accused of being part of a conspiracy to sell weaponry. He was stationed in Afghanistan. Long story, really short. There was one guy who was doing a lot of bad stuff, and he had some issues as well. His wife was leaving him, and she was cheating, and she was taking the kids and all this type of stuff while he's deployed. So and she's spending up all his money, so now he's got creditors. There's none of these situations are ever like, you're a bad guy, you're just evil. There's always stuff that's behind it. But nonetheless, he was doing some things he shouldn't have been doing. And when he gets caught, he's facing 130 years in federal prison, and he just starts naming everybody he could think of. And the interesting thing about my client's case was, like, my client went in, talked to the officers. He had never done anything wrong. So he was like, I'll talk, I'll say whatever you need me to say, everything's fine. They go and they check, and the conspirator kept telling different stories about my client. And it was just like,
it's not tracking.
It's not tracking. And not only did he tell different stories about my client, there were some people that he told the truth about, and they got convicted and they went through that. But my client was that one that it was just like they threw him in. And there were a couple other people that he named, and they wound up getting kind of exonerated, and they never even had charges brought against them. But my client wound up having charges brought against him because there had been a money transfer. But the interesting thing about the money transfer, right, that the things that he was selling for about $200, $300 a piece. And these were consistent transfers from everybody that was involved in it. My client gave him $600, right? And so it's like, so either he was really good and duped my client into buying this thing for way more than he was selling it to everybody else, or the story that my client had tracks out. Now, what everybody else didn't know, but what we knew was, not only did my client, so the guy had came to my client right before he went on R&R, so when he was getting leave to go back home to the States, and he had talked about his sob story. His wife was doing the things that she was doing. He needed money. And one of the reasons why he was doing all this dirty stuff is because he needed money. So he came to my client, hey, can I borrow anything? Can you give me any money to take back? What everybody else, including this guy, doesn't know is that my client didn't manage his money. His wife did. So he calls home and says, hey, babe, can we give him any money? What can we do? She sets the standard, and her name is on the account that the money's come from. So this transfer didn't come directly from my client to him. And so in the case, long story, like I said, less long, what you got to see was the guy who was making up the stories didn't know any of this background. So he made up all types of stuff. Oh, we were in my room and we did this transfer and he did it right on my computer, etc. It was like, really? That's interesting. Because do you know that the transfer didn't actually happen in Afghanistan? The transfer happened from the United States to Afghanistan. Oh, and did you also know that it wasn't from my client's account? And the NCIS agent hadn't done his research, and so he didn't know this either, and he was trying to act like this was an open and shut case. And I was like, you all have the ability to track where transfers come from. Like, that's a pretty standard ability for NCIS, isn't it? And he was like, of course, yeah. I was like, so at any point in time in your investigation, did you come upon the fact that this didn't come from my client's bank account, but it came from his wife's bank account? So, I'm not really sure. Exactly. And did you check and see that the transfer actually happened from the U.S. to Afghanistan, not Afghanistan to Afghanistan, right? The transfer online. I don't know. Long story short, this kid had spent a year and a half. He was about to get promoted to sergeant. He was about to re-enlist. all of that was on hold. He was getting corporal pay still, and there was a number of different things that happened with his life. But he was so dedicated to the Marine Corps that all he wanted to do was stay in the Marine Corps. And this was after, they had been threatening him and all the rest of this type of stuff. And it was so painful for me when I was dealing with this. And one of the main reasons, like, the kid came to me and he was like, sir, because at the time they were giving out deals for like 3 months to 4 months, and his wife had just gotten pregnant. They had been trying to get pregnant for 3 years. She had just gotten pregnant, and so he was like, "Sir, can I just plead guilty so that I can be out by the time my baby is born?"
Wow.
Like, and of course, as the lawyer, I'm like, "Did you do it?" Like, because that's different than what everything else you told me. So talk to me, like, tell me how you did it if you did. He's like, "I didn't do it. But if it means that I can just get out and be there for my child, then I'll be cool." And I'm like, "But I can't let you plead guilty to something you didn't do. So if you can tell me you did it, then we good. But if you can't tell me you did it, then we can't do that." He's like, "Well, I didn't do it, sir. So I didn't do anything wrong. But like, can I just tell him I did something wrong so that I can get out?" And like, that conversation was so difficult. And then the second conversation, which was like, after he was going through all of this bad stuff, he had gotten hurt. And they wouldn't let him get surgery for his shoulder. There were so many things that he was getting denied because he was this bad guy now, right?
Yeah.
And there were so many of us that were like, "Hey, like, you got out. When you get finished, like, we're pretty sure that you're gonna get acquitted. That we're gonna make that happen." I had to work hard to do it, but I figured that we had this case in the back. But it's like, you might want to think about doing something different, just going, and because it might not go well for you if you get acquitted of this and then you keep going. But his love for the Marine Corps was so, he was like, "No, this is all I've ever wanted to do, sir. I want to be a Marine." So he stayed. I saw him a year and a half after the trial, and he was still in the Marine Corps, still doing the thing, and he loved the Marine Corps, and it was amazing. But that was another case that really, emotionally for me, right? Because it'd be different if I thought that he had did something wrong. It'd be a completely different story. But
Yeah.
like, I get to grill them. I get to ask the questions that nobody else gets to ask. I get to say, "That doesn't make sense. Tell me again," and over and over and over again. So most of my clients, right, I had a very good understanding of whether they did it, whether they didn't. This kid I know didn't do it. And to see the trauma, like, he wound up getting sick and gaining weight and all types of other stuff. And then he wound up getting back in shape after but you just saw, like, I got him acquitted, but I couldn't give him the year and a half of his life back.
Yeah.
And so that was really trying. But anyway, that was my defense career.
So you said you advised 200 cases.
Mm-hmm.
You took 70, and only 10 went to trial?
Yeah, 11 over the course of time. Yeah, only because, like I said, a number of them. So of the 70 cases that I had, probably about 40 of them, 35 to 40 of them, were cases where they were going to get fired from the Marine Corps. So technically, there were trials, but there were hearings. So
Yeah.
I did about 25 of those that wound up being hearings that I was also kind of in trial. But the stakes were a lot lower on those. Like, at worst case scenario, you lose your job, right? Like, you're not, it wasn't, and for the person, don't get me wrong, it was still bad, but it wasn't the horrific scenario of you're a criminal when we get finished. And so that was probably about a good 35 to 40 of the cases that I had. And then 30 of the cases that I had were criminal cases. And in those cases, like I said, 11 of them went to trial. The others, we either were able to get them dismissed before we even hit a trial. So there were a number of cases where they thought that my client did something and they found out that they didn't, right? A lot of them, sometimes there would be, you pop on a urinalysis test and they think that you did something, so they charge you with unlawful use of drugs, and they find out you had a prescription for the medication and they didn't know that you had a prescription, so the charges go away. Or somebody says that you did something and then it comes out that somebody else did it, those types of things. So those cases will go away. So of the 30 or so that I had, we had some guilties as well. Some people that were guilty, and what we did is we had them plead guilty, and we worked out the sentencing structure with the cases. I had a couple of cases like that, most of them involving drug use or something like that, where the people were guilty, and so we went and took them to plead to their guilt and to work on what was a good sentence and their rehabilitation.
Okay.
So that was, over the course of that 2 years, I did a lot of different work. The trials were the ones that stick out the most, mainly because they were the most high stakes.
And about how long did these trials take? Do they have like an average time? Or?
Yeah, so normal trial, like I would say, I want to say I did 6 of those or 7 of those trials, which are special court martials, which are basically misdemeanor court. You could serve at most a year. And in those trials, it's normally about 3 days. And then in those federal felony level courts, the general court martials, those are about 5 days. And so in those trials, you're in court, you know, the majority, the bulk of the day, 9 to 5 and later. And you're calling witnesses, going through testimony, doing all the rest of that type of stuff. And then the jury is deliberating and you're waiting. That experience, I mean, it's interesting because it was what I had trained for, it was what I wanted. I wanted to be a litigator. That was what I was on the mock trial team when I was in undergrad at U of I. We were nationally ranked. I was on the mock trial team when I was in law school. So this is what I've been doing. The interesting thing about litigation is once you're doing it for real, there's real people's stories, there's real people's lives. And so it's not, at least for me, there's some people that can still do it and it's just a game and it's just, you know, it's the thrill of the battle, right? For me, I always got locked into the reality of my clients' lives, and that was one of the things that was difficult for me. It's one of the reasons why I don't practice law now, because the problems that they were dealing with and the things that I was dealing with, like I said, even when I won, and I won 70% of the time, I wasn't able to give them back the time that they had lost by being accused and by everybody around you thinking that you've done something that is outside of your character and outside of the person that you are. And that was something that was really difficult for me as an attorney. And it was one of the reasons why I decided to request command right after that, because I saw so much in the system that we were quick to say, he did something wrong, let's send him through the system. And a lot of that is because people were trying not to lose their jobs. They're worried about, if I let this go, if this does, right? It makes perfect sense why they would do it that way. So I didn't hold it against them, but the place where I could be of most service was not kind of outside of the system railing against the machine, but more as a commander. And that was because I spoke to a lot of commanders, and a lot of times I helped them to come to solutions where they didn't have to, perfect case. I had one case where there was a kid, he was a bad egg, right? He didn't need to be in the Marine Corps. He'd already been busted down from Lance Corporal to PSC to private. He was already getting ready to get kicked out. And he had popped on a urinalysis for Oxycontin, which is a narcotic. Problem is, again, the systems that we have didn't show that he had a prescription for this drug. And I had the prescription paperwork, it's obvious that, and once you have a prescription, it's no longer a crime. You're completely doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Yeah. And so this was an administrative error where we just didn't know, his command just didn't know that he had a prescription. Perfectly fine. But they were going to try to send him to trial for this issue. And it's like, okay, let's pause for a second. Because I agree, and the kid didn't even want to be there. He wanted to get out. He was like, just fire me, kick me out of the Marine Corps, that's fine. But I didn't do this, so I'm going to fight this because I didn't do, right? There's that argument of, I'm not going to get in trouble for something I didn't do.
Yeah. He'll take the other than honorable discharge over the dishonorable discharge.
Exactly, right? And so, and being a criminal, right? And so at the end of the day, because all the stuff he had gotten in trouble for before was like not coming back from leave on time, or like a whole bunch of ne'er-do-well, you don't need to be in the military type of stuff, but not
crimes.
Exactly. And so I helped the command to figure out, okay, here's the deal. And I went in, this is towards the end of my career in defense. I'm like, here's 2 things. Number one, I'm about to be a company commander. So I'm thinking about this, and I've always been thinking about this from the position of being in command. Second thing, I've won 3 cases like this already. It's a really easy case to win. Here's the deal. He didn't do a crime. You're going to send this to trial. You're going to spend a whole bunch of money. We're going to call a whole bunch of witnesses. And at the end of the day, you're going to find out that he didn't do the crime, which I'm telling you right now. The elements are not met. You can't beat it. But here's the other thing that you need to realize. We have a point of meeting. He wants to get out of the Marine Corps. He wants to go home. He wants to be back with his friends doing 18 to 22-year-old stuff. you want him out of the Marine Corps, and he's already done enough stuff for you to accept him. You've already done the paperwork. So we worked it out. So it was like, send that paperwork up, get it done. He can be out of the Marine Corps in 2 months, or 2 weeks rather, and you can be getting another Marine to fill his spot. Whereas if we go through this process of trying to take it to trial, just administratively, the trial is going to be 3 or 4 months from now. Then he's going to get acquitted. Then you're going to try to ADCEP him later, because you can't ADCEP him while he's going to trial. So all that paperwork has to restart 3 to 4 months from now. You're 6, 8 months later before this kid is out.
Yeah.
So which one are we going to do? And easily enough, the trial goes away. The kid gets ADCEP. He's out of the Marine Corps in 2 weeks, and the unit gets another Marine. And so now the unit's better. Like, it was about helping to create a solution where everybody wins. And that's the thing that I think being in defense before I was in command or in any other type of unit really helped me to see. There are a number of solutions that work, because at the end of the day, even if we have these criminals, right, they have done something that the majority of Americans haven't done, which is they have stepped up and taken the oath,
Yeah.
right? So at some point in time in their lives, they had some semblance of, this is bigger than me and I want to do something better than myself. And if we can keep that in mind, then what we were able to do, like, was to make solutions that work better for everybody. And that was really my goal, especially toward the end of my defense career, once I had seen the system in action. And then once I became a company commander, it was the same thing. My goal was to figure out, we had to kick 2 Marines out while I was company commander, but those Marines left thanking me and prepared for the next chapter of their lives, instead of disgruntled and thinking that the Marine Corps sucks and hating everything.
Yeah. So before we move too much forward into your time as a company commander, what was the trials like? Just like the bare bones of the trial.
Okay.
Like, who was the judge? Who was the jury?
Right. So all of those, generally you have a jury of members. They can be Navy or Marine Corps members. They're whatever unit is conducting the trial. So, for example, if it's 2nd Maintenance Battalion, or if it's Headquarters Regiment, which is a logistics element, right? They would source the members for that trial. So you're judged not by just your peers Marine Corps wide, but by your peers in your unit. And then we would do jury selection, and we would generally wind up with a panel of anywhere between 3 and 10 members. Sometimes there were panels even bigger, 12 or 15 members, but those are, it's normally not that many people. And then you'd have a judge who was part of another section that's not technically part of legal support services section. It's another administrative distinction. So you'd have a judge that would preside over the case, and that was a Marine Corps officer, generally, or a naval officer. But all of my cases were presided over by Marine Corps judges. And then you would have a prosecution team, which was from the trial shop. And that was just like I got assigned to defense, there were people that got assigned to trial. And sometimes you would go back and forth. And so, like, a friend of mine who was a defense counsel for his first 2 years at Camp Lejeune left from defense and went to trial. And became a trial counsel the next 2 years. And so those are, it's not as if you have a defense brain and you're only defense. I had another colleague who had been a trial counsel in Parris Island and came and got transferred to Camp Lejeune, and she was a defense counsel at Camp Lejeune. So if you've ever seen the TV show JAG, it's not as fluid as they make it, where you can be on trial one day and then you can be on defense the next day, but it is, it's not one of those things where you're a defense counsel and you're always a defense counsel, or you're a trial counsel, you're always a trial counsel.
Yeah.
So that's the way that the court was set up. Generally, there would be 2 attorneys on each case. So I was lead attorney on a number of the cases that I did, but I was also second chairing. And generally, you'll break the case up and you'll do certain things depending on what your specialties are. So I was really good at cross-examination. I would cross-examine a lot of witnesses. I would do closings because I was also good at that. And ultimately, you prosecute the trial. You bring people on, you have them tell their stories. And oftentimes what would happen in my cases was the story that gets told in paperwork is a lot less robust and realistic than the story that actually exists.
Yeah.
And so when you get people on the stand and you actually get them telling what they know, and then you get them talking about what they just conjecture or what they just speculate about or what they just think might possibly be the case, then you start to see that the story that's on paper sounded a lot more confident than the real story. And so that was what happened in the majority of my cases. I mean, even the cases where my clients got convicted, like I said, I had one client that got convicted of drunken disorderly conduct, which is what we said at the beginning he was guilty of, and we had been willing to do an NJP, but the command thought that he was guilty of assault and hazing and all these other things, which we were like, we've done the investigation, we've talked to people, like nobody says that he did this. Your witnesses. And so that was a fun case, because literally the prosecution's witnesses came on and they said, the prosecution asked them questions, and then we asked them questions. We were like, so the prosecution says that he assaulted you. Did he assault you? No. Did he ever haze you? Did you ever feel threatened? Did you ever feel in danger? No, no, no. Actually, I wanted him to be the person that pinned me on when I picked up corporal, but the command wouldn't let me because he was charged with this, and they didn't want it to happen. I think that he's an amazing Marine. That was the kind of case that was. Like, so it was basically their case made our case. And so at the end of the trial, we were like, so jury, like we said, at the end of the day, when you hear all the witnesses, you're going to come to the same conclusion we came to, which is, why are we here? And they did. And they had to convict him of drunken disorderly conduct. He was drunken disorderly. It was completely stupid, and they were just all roughhousing and playing around. They were all drunken disorderly, though. He was just the only one that got charged. And so he got convicted, and he got a reprimand. And it was like, yay, we spent 3 days of everybody's life to do what we could have done in the CO's office.
So these were different from NJP, non-judicial punishment.
Right.
These weren't like a captain's mask. This was a real criminal case.
Exactly. This is a real criminal case that should have been a captain's mask or an office hours or an NJP, right? But at the end, and this was the thing that I saw over and over and over again, which is why I wanted to be a company commander. Like, I wanted to be the person making those decisions or recommending to my battalion commander what we should do in those situations. I wanted to be in those legal meetings, because a lot of times what happens is it's incomplete information going through the chain. And so, of course, if I've got 70 problems and I got something that looks a little bit like a problem, I'm going to run it through the system, because I'm getting incomplete information. And so I can't rely on, you've looked at this, you've thought about this, you know about this, and so I can say, nah, we don't need to do that. Normally, by the time it gets to the battalion commander, he's the person or she's the person that's having to stop the train, because everybody else is just passing it along. It's not my job, not my job. Hey, they did something wrong. How do I cover my butt? I make sure I pass it up. Never be the highest ranking person with a secret, right? Mm-hmm. Right? And so there's this idea of just pass it through and let the system do it. The system will work it out. But that's not what's best for the Marine or sailor that's in your charge, that you're charged with taking care of. Just because you think they might have done something wrong doesn't mean that they're not your sailor or your Marine.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that was so problematic for me. And so as a company commander, that was what I really focused on. There were a number of times. I mean, I had Marines that did stupid stuff. I had a Marine that got a speeding ticket going 75 and a 35, right?
Sounds like a Marine.
Right. And he was on a motorcycle, and there was a stretch of road at 10:30 at night. What's the harm, right? That was his thought. Now, we could have run him up the mast and gotten him in a whole bunch of trouble, put a 6105 on his record, all the rest of this type of stuff. But we looked at the Marine, right? Who was he? Had he been in trouble? He wasn't a troublemaker. He just got promoted to sergeant, which you could look at it one way and he should be a better example. Or you could look at it like he's 23 and he has a motorcycle and it's Camp Lejeune at 10 o'clock at night, like, and he's single. Like, these are the types of things that they do. We don't catch them hardly anywhere near as much as it happens. And so how do we make an example? We had him teach about how stupid of an idea that was and why he shouldn't do it and what he could have done. We used him as a tool to make the entire unit better.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we made him a better leader.
Yeah, and you taught him a lesson. You taught him, this could have been much worse if we decided to just send it up. But
Exactly.
Instead, we're making it better for you and the Marines.
Exactly, because my job as a company commander was to develop you into a better leader, right? And I don't do that by just slapping your hand all the time.
Yeah.
Right? Especially at the end of the day, he got a ticket. Like, there's not a whole bunch that we were going to be able to do. All the administrative stuff that we would have done would not have taught him the lesson that the sit down, the conversation, and the making him teach what he learned did for him and did for them.
Yeah.
I didn't have another speeding ticket the entire time I was commander.
There you go. So what years were you commander?
So I was company commander from June of 2015 to July of 2016.
Okay. And in the hierarchy, where exactly does company commander sit?
Okay, so in the unit that I was commander of, I was Bravo Company Commander for Headquarters and Support Battalion, Marine Corps Installations, Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, Marine Corps Installations East. So basically, if you look at the entirety of the base of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, there's a commanding general that's over the base, and he runs all of the different sections, the G4, which is logistics, the G6, which is communications, right? The G1, which is admin. All of those sections, he has all of the civilians and all of the military personnel that are involved in that. And then there's a number of tenant commands, like the 2MEF is on, the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force is a tenant of Camp Lejeune. 2nd Marine Division is a tenant of Camp Lejeune. There's a number of different tenants that he works in kind of cohort with to be the support of those units and what they're doing. Underneath the general is Headquarters and Support Battalion for Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune. And that's my boss, who was the colonel at the time. Colonel Seagraves was my boss. And during that, his purview is all of the administrative work that is kind of below the colonel level or at the same level. He was peers with everybody that was, so the G4, the senior logistics person on the base, or the senior kind of transportation, logistics, food services management, all of that type of stuff. That person, he was a peer with, but he was also positionally superior to. So all of those people and all of their subordinate commands were underneath Headquarters and Support Battalion, and we were in charge of them administratively, and any disciplinary, any issues like that we took care of. If anybody needed to get court-martialed, if anybody got in trouble, if anybody needed to get training, if anybody needed all of the basic things for the upkeep and the care of the Marines, we were the high point of that chain. So that was Headquarters Support Battalion. I was Bravo Company. There were 4 companies: Alpha Company, Bravo Company, India Company, and Security Company. Alpha Company had a number of different units, and we did a reorganization during that year. So that's the reason why I'm trying to remember what it was like when I first started. Alpha Company had kind of like the post office and the postal Marines were under Alpha Company. And this is the base post office. Now, Camp Lejeune had about 45 to 50,000 personnel aboard the base. So the base post office was a big concern, number of Marines. They had, Alpha Company also had the Legal Support Services Section East originally, and that was another 200 or so Marines, about 40 officers. And then Alpha Company had a number of other kind of smaller units that were part of it. The whole company, I want to say, was about 230, 240 Marines when it first started, maybe 270 Marines. Bravo Company, I had about 25 different sections that were just kind of hodgepodge, a collection, right? So I had the Combat Camera Marines, I had the G6 Marines, which is the communications branch, communications arm. I had the FSMAO Marines, which FSMAO is they go and do inspections to make sure that inventories are kept up, that we know where all the weapons are, that we know where all the equipment is. They go and inspect the units to make sure they're doing the systems the right way. I had the EOD Marines, so the Explosive Ordnance Demolition and Disposal Marines. That was a unit that I had that was aboard Camp Geiger. I had MISO, which was an administrative section that was aboard Camp Johnson. And then I had, like I said, the G4 Marines, so the Food Service Marines, DMO, which was the transportation management and dependent management arm of the wing. So anything that got moved from Camp Lejeune somewhere else, when people PCS'd and everything, those Marines, those were my Marines. And I had a number of other different sections. Like I said, there were about 18, 20 different sections that I owned across the base. We did the reorganization. I also wound up getting the Legal Support Services section that came underneath my purview, and there were a couple of other sections that we added as well. The not personnel, the base PAO office, which is the public affairs office, came under my purview as well. So we went from being the smallest company in the battalion. We had about 220 sailors and Marines to start off with. We had the boat crew, the Navy boat crew that was on base, so they patrolled all the waterways and make sure that there was nobody doing anything they shouldn't be doing on the waterways aboard Camp Lejeune, because there's a number of rivers and inlets that run through the base. That was part of my group as well. When we did the reorganization, we went from 220 to about 385 Marines and sailors that were part of my organization. Now, when I started, I had a staff of 5. When we did the reorganization, I had a staff of 5. So it was good though, because my staff they were well-oiled machine. They were running it. They did phenomenal things, and we actually did a great job. So we went from being the smallest company in the battalion to one of the largest companies in the entire Marine Corps. And it was a wild ride. It was a lot of fun. Camp Lejeune has a beach. We owned the beach deck, so I had the Baywatch crew. That was my there were my Marines as well. And then we housed a number of different units, kind of the RBE, remain behind elements, for a number of different units that would, when they were deploying, we were in charge of them and responsible for them as well.
Okay. What rank were you at this point?
Okay, so I was a captain at this time. I pinned on captain because one of the benefits of the program that I was in was, even though I didn't wind up getting paid while I was in law school, I was picking up time in service, time and grade. So I picked up captain, I want to say it was November of 2013. So it was while I was at Naval Justice School, I picked up captain. And then so I was a captain for the majority of my active duty service in the Marine Corps. Okay. So my first year I was a butter bar when I went on ADOS orders during the summer. And then the second year I was a butter bar, and then I got promoted to first lieutenant, and I spent all of training as a first lieutenant. And then I picked up captain just as I was finishing up Naval Justice School training.
Okay. And you just stayed captain until you got out?
Yeah, I stayed captain until I got out. And interestingly enough, like I was telling you before we started talking, I got notified because I'm still in the reserves, technically, like I'm on the rolls in the reserves. And my wife and I talked back and forth about whether or not I'll pick up a reserve billet here, but I just got selected for major.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
It's a heck of an honor for a reservist to get, right?
Yeah, it was definitely. I didn't expect it, and I mean I felt like my career and the things that I had done while I was in the Marine Corps, because I was company commander and I received the Navy Marine Corps Commendation Medal for my time there, and the things that we did. I also, and then I went and I picked up a billet. I was the regional civil law officer, so that was a major's billet that I held after I went into. And I was still a junior captain at the time. I did that billet for 6 months and transitioned it over to a major, but during that period of time I also revamped how we did the work that we did and shrunk our lead time on the requests for information and requests for documents that we would get from 14 days to about 5 days external, 3 days internal. And during that period of time I ran the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society does an active duty fund drive every year, and technically the coordination of that committee and the coordination of that event is another major's billet that I held concurrently with the other major's billet that I had, and so I ran that, and we actually were able to raise over $230,000 that year aboard Camp Lejeune. And so while I was in, I felt like I had a pretty good career. I always got good marks, and I wound up being career designated while I was in the Marine Corps. And so that kind of distinction is, as an officer, what they do is they look at your first tour and they say, okay, when you're about 2.5, 3 years in, they say, okay, they put everybody on a panel, and who are we going to select that we think should remain in the Marine Corps, should be able to go basically to 20 years. And so once you go through that board, you get selected, you're a career designate candidate, it basically says the Marine Corps thinks that you can remain a Marine Corps officer. You've been pretty good while you were there.
Yeah, I can see why they'd want to keep you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. But yes, I'm really excited about, like, I love my Marine Corps experience. I love the Marine Corps, and I think that getting out was more, it was a family decision. It was interesting because I didn't wind up deploying, and one of the things that I realized over the time that I was there was how much anxiety that possibility caused my wife. I would be remiss if I didn't, or I would be less than honest if I said that she was excited about me joining the Marine Corps when I joined at 27 and we had a 2-year-old baby. She was supportive, but she was definitely not excited. And I think I didn't realize how much stress and anxiety the service takes on the spouses. And I learned that over the course of my time in the Marine Corps. I did a lot of retirements as a company commander and a lot of ceremonies for Marines. And one of the things that always struck me was the comments from the family. And there were so many times where it was, we missed you a lot, we loved you a lot. And one of the things we tried to do is we always gave certificates of appreciation to the family members at the retirement because of the sacrifices they made. And just hearing all of those stories over and over again really put into kind of context what my wife was doing and what she was going through. And so that is something that when I made the decision not to continue my career in the Marine Corps, it was a large part because of the fact that my family really wanted me at home. And even though I was stateside, I remember there was a time period, especially because I did defense, which was lots of hours, lots of time. I was visiting my clients in the brig. I was staying up late and coming home at 11, 12 o'clock because I had these cases that were really important, and the stress of it was always on my mind. So, and then I went to company command. You're a 24/7 commander. It's not like 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and then I don't got to worry about it. I get messages in the middle of the night, all those types of things. So it was, even though I was home, my wife would talk about I wasn't home, I wasn't present, and that was something that she really wanted. And so I kind of made the decision for my family that I'm not going to continue pursuing that track because I wanted to be home and to be available for them, especially because what my wife started to realize was over the years that we didn't deploy, and if it was that hard when we didn't deploy, what was it going to be like when I'm gone for 6, 7, 10 months, 12 months? And so I really applaud the families that have endured deployment and the spouses that have, held the home front home, and those Marines and sailors that have had to do it. It was definitely an eye-opening experience to me for the tremendous toll that it takes on the family.
Yeah, that's one of the driving factors for a lot of people that get out of the military is they want a solid family.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you were, just to jump back just a little bit,
mm-hmm.
when you were a company commander, was there any, other than the restructuring, was there any big things that you think are noteworthy? Well,
I mean, as far as accomplishments or anything like that, one of the big things that I was proud of is our battalion in general had a readiness rating that was relatively low, and these are mainly administrative issues. Numbers that we get from the Navy docs, numbers that we get from here, and the way that things need to work. We wanted to have 85% readiness because what 85% readiness says is that 85% of the battalion at any time, if we needed to go and send people to deploy, is ready to go. And we were consistently hovering, as a battalion somewhere around 82 to 86%. But in my company, when I took over, we were at 74%. And one of the things that I was struggling with was in the 2 months from the time I took over until I started figuring out how to get my head screwed on right, we dropped from 74% to 70%. And what was hardest about that was, I'm putting in hours, I'm there at 7 in the morning, I don't leave till 7, 8 at night, and like trying to figure out all of these things and try to get people to do the stuff they need to do. We gotta get people to range, we gotta get people to the doctor, we gotta get people taking classes, we gotta get all this stuff done. And ultimately what I learned was, and this is a really important leadership point for me, I learned that, I'm good and I can work hard, but at the end of the day, leadership is about getting other people to do great things and getting other people to manifest or to bring forward the greatness that's within them.
Yeah.
And so it didn't really matter how hard I worked. It mattered how effective I was at bringing out the best in my people. And so when I started changing my focus and really started focusing more on putting people in positions to be successful and setting up systems that worked for my people instead of systems that worked intellectually in my head and were great for me to do, then we were able to do tremendous things. We actually increased our readiness from 70% to 90% over the course of about 4 months, and consistently stayed about above 87%, and that was with an upper cap of 93%. So 7% of my company at no point in time was going to be ready because of administrative barriers. So some people were, hurt. They were still eligible for stateside service, but they could never deploy. Some people were on maternity leave, so they had just had a baby, and there's mandatory 240 days that you had to wait before you were eligible to deploy because you have to get cleared by all the medical docs and all the rest of that type of stuff. You had other people who were getting ready to retire, and so they're non-deployable because they don't have enough time left on service, that type of thing. So 7% of my company was never going to be in that administratively ready to deploy, and so to get to 90% out of 93% was a tremendous accomplishment for us, and especially coming from where we were at 70. So that was kind of a cool experience. One of the things that happened while we were there, and there was this big push to really to have better security around the bases. I don't know if you remember, that was when there was some of the random shooter attacks at Marine Corps recruiting stations and Navy recruiting stations and things like that. And so there was this big push all over the country to really reevaluate our security posture. And so there was a lot of training that we did to get increased support personnel, especially when we would raise the DEFCON levels and force protection levels. And so we were instrumental in getting people trained and figuring out how we were going to do that and everything, because being the second largest Marine Corps base, there's a lot of kind of eyes focused on what we did. And so getting our people trained and going through those courses was important. There was a lot of active shooter training that we wound up doing as well. And then, like I said, I got to be involved in a lot of kind of conversations about legal procedure with Marines, because every meeting, every commander's meeting, every staff meeting that we had a legal meeting. And what I got to see was the number of those cases that we were really struggling with start to decrease, because we started learning and becoming a lot better at dealing with it at lower levels. And that was something I felt really happy about being instrumental in.
Okay, so you said you had 5 support people with you as like your core group. Were they all officers, or?
No. I had I was the only officer. Normally in a company you have an executive officer as well, who's normally a first lieutenant or a second lieutenant that's working there. But my company was set up. It was me, my first sergeant, my company gunnery sergeant. I had my barracks sergeant, barracks manager, and then I had a clerk that was in my office. And then for about the first half of that year, I had a staff sergeant who was my company gunnery sergeant, who was also getting ready to get out and get medically separated. And so there was a little bit of an overlap with my staff sergeant when we got a company gunnery sergeant that came in. And so we had the 6 personnel for a little bit. But with my staff sergeant, he was kind of transitioning out, and so we didn't give him a lot of stuff to do because he was hitting medical appointments and doing stuff like that. So
Yeah. Did you ever have any pushback from your enlisted guys? Because I know a lot of senior enlisted don't have the best view of junior officers. And I know at that point you weren't really a junior officer, but you'd only been in like 8 years.
Yeah, right. And at that time, I'd only been in 5 years, and I had been active for 2.5, 3 years. So what was interesting about it, and this was where my father being a staff NCO was really helpful to me. I always grew up, everybody I knew were enlisted in staff NCOs. And my father always told me, from the beginning, whenever I thought about going into the military, he was like, hey, son, here's the deal. As an officer, you need to go in and find the saltiest, longest standing, crustiest staff NCO that you can think of, and sit at their knee and learn everything you can learn about leading from them. And so that was the kind of approach that I took to it. The other part that was really cool was, even though I was junior in Marine Corps years to all of my staff, I was my first sergeant, I think, was a year older than me. And my company gunnery sergeant, we were the same age, and everybody else was younger than me. So I still had age maturity, and I also had a respect for their knowledge and their experience. And so I didn't lead from a position of, all right, here's what we're going to do. Ready, go do it. I led from a position of, all right, here's what the problem is. Talk to me about the solutions that you're aware of. What have you tried? What have you seen? Teach me what you know. And then ultimately the decision is mine to make. But I loved leading by consensus because I wanted them to be invested in what we were doing. I didn't want it to just be my plan that they were trying to carry out, because that doesn't allow them, like I said, that doesn't allow them to bring their genius and their greatness to the table. And so the conversations that I had with my staff, I mean, oftentimes I would ask them, you know, I would have them push back. I would say, okay, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Why is this stupid? Right? Like that was a normal conversation that we would have. What's wrong with it? What problems do you see? I didn't want to walk around like the emperor with no clothes on. I wanted to be the type of leader that my people could feel comfortable following, because they knew that I wasn't going to lead them into anything bad. I remember we watched a lot of Band of Brothers when I was in officer candidate school and the basic school, and David Schwimmer's character, right, getting lost on maneuvers, and this fence shouldn't be here. And you never want to be that guy. And so I was always comfortable. I didn't need to be the smartest guy in the room. I didn't want to be the smartest guy in the room. I was confident that I was smart, and I was confident that I was surrounded by a lot of other smart guys. Let's use our intelligence and do the best thing. And I feel like that's what we did. And, you know, my company gunnery sergeant got promoted. He's a first sergeant now. My first sergeant is now a sergeant major. And they're leading and working with Marines and advising and helping. And I'm still friends with those guys to this day.
That's awesome. So that's what you did right up until you decided to get out?
So no, after I left command, I transitioned command in 2016. So I had another year and a half that I was in, and I spent 6 months. And it was interesting because it was about that time that I was looking at what my decision was going to be. And so I wound up getting career designated shortly thereafter. And then my wife and I talked, and we decided to leave the Marine Corps. So I was in legal support, legal services. I did a lot of divorce counseling. I wound up becoming the mediator for Camp Lejeune. So there was a new pilot program that we were working on to help married couples to deal with their problems, and instead of having to go and do a divorce where both sides are kind of against each other and adversarial, we started a mediation group where you could come in and we could help you to divvy all that stuff up and do a lot of stuff that you would pay a civilian lawyer to do, and it would cost a lot of money on both sides. And we set up offices to do that directly inside the in the office. So I did that work. I did a lot of work with junior Marines who had kind of issues with credit card companies coming after them, or just contracts with their lease and their tenant or their landlord, stuff like that. And then we did a lot of the pre-deployment briefs. So I would go to the units that were getting ready to deploy, and we would give them all the information that they needed so that they could be ready to deploy. How to deal with your cell phone, how to deal with your car insurance, how to deal with bills and all these different types of things. We would teach them about the Service Member Civil Relief Act. And so if we had a lot of reservist units that would come in and get ready to get deployed, so they need to know, can they fire me? Can this happen? Can that happen? We would help them and brief them on that. We would do a lot of powers of attorneys for them, and so that they could set up their spouses or their parents or whoever was going to take care of their estate while they're deployed. We would make sure they get wills and all the rest of that type of stuff. So it was a lot of services, and I briefed over 2,000 people in the 6 months that I was in legal support services, just getting them ready to get deployed. Because, like I said, the deployment rates were really high. They had shrunk for lawyers, but they had went up for everybody else. And so I was dealing with a lot of people who were getting deployed. And then I got tapped. There was a major who was the regional civil law officer. He wound up getting deployed because at this point in time, only majors were getting deployed on MUs and attaching to units. And so he wound up getting deployed. The colonel, who was the officer in charge, came to me and said, "Hey, look, I need somebody to do this job. We don't have any other majors that, that can be pulled from what they're doing. And so you're one of my senior captains. You've had command experience. This is an important job. I need you to do it. So I went ahead and I took that role. And we set about really restructuring that office to be better at what it did, to be more efficient at what it did, because a lot of the weight of that, the regional civil law officer sends opinions to colonels, to lieutenant colonels, to generals, to things that you're going to be advising commands out in the field. And so one of the issues with that was the way that it was set up was that the officer had to do all of that work, or had to at least be responsible for all of that work. And because of that, like I said, system idea of thinking, my name is on it, so then I have to do all of the work, that creates a funnel, and it creates a choke point where that person had to do so much work. And we would have people come through the office who, I supervised anywhere from 2 to 7 different attorneys at any point in time in that office. And the crazy thing was, these attorneys were attorneys who were coming out of law school, who were great at research, great at writing, right? They were coming from some of the top law schools in the country, so they could do the work. That wasn't the question. But we didn't have a system that was set up that allowed the officer in charge to do the part that they needed to do, which was really proofreading and making sure that it was sound legal logic. We didn't have that. So what I did is I wound up revamping the system. Like I said, it used to take about 14 days on some of our larger projects to get stuff out. And we were able to cut that down to 5 days externally, 3 days internally, where we would be able to get the work turned around. And what was even more important was I was able to remove a lot of what the officer in charge had to do, so that it didn't slow down the process as much. Because a lot of the slowing down the process, the old process was they still did all the research and did everything, but then they would bring it and the person would have to read through everything and decide and do all the rest of the type of stuff. And so we created a process that was a lot more efficient, so that while I was officer in charge, I also wound up becoming and being chairperson of that committee where we were doing the fundraiser. So I was running a fundraiser for the entire base. And then I wound up getting that 11th case that I told you about. I wound up getting requested to be on another case, which was a high profile case that was in Quantico. It was being tried in Quantico, and it was about, it was one of the Parris Island cases during that period of time where there was a number of recruit mistreatment allegations that were going on. My case was not attached to the death of the recruit. It was in the same company, not in the same platoon as the recruit that died. Different staff, different people, everything else. And there were the charges were nowhere near as severe, but there was this kind of spotlight and catch everything that's bad. And so they were trying to throw the hammer at some behavior that was really not anywhere near that level.
Not as bad as someone dying, but still less than acceptable, so to say.
Less than acceptable, but not even close to someone dying, right? Like, and so the thing that was going on, and one of the things that we dealt with in the case was the reality of the situation is they were trying to get people for violating the recruit training order. But when you read the recruit training order, it's so ambiguous in a lot of areas about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, how you do this, and where so there's a lot of room for discretion.
Yeah.
Right? Inherently, when you get a lot of room for discretion, what you also have is a lot of room for people to make mistakes. Now, the question about your discretion and your bad judgment is not whether the judgment was bad. Like, we can all agree that the judgment was bad. The question was, is it due to recklessness? Is it due to negligence? Or is it just due to you making a mistake?
Yeah.
When you look at those questions, a lot of times people are making mistakes. They're stupid actions, but it's not criminal. It's not like you were trying to mess something up. And that's what we were dealing with in that case. Like, there was, like I said, in that case, my client had already admitted in the investigation. He was like, yeah, we were doing incentive training that was illegal. We were doing incentive training that wasn't according to the specs. So we had him for that, but that's an NJPable offense. That's one of those types of things where you don't do that anymore. It wasn't anything where they were putting people's lives in danger or anything like that. So when you when you look at what was going on, and I want to be clear here, it's not to minimize the behavior.
Yeah.
The behavior was wrong, admittedly, by the person that was doing the behavior.
Yeah.
It wasn't like we had to convince people that this behavior was wrong. The issue was there were a number of other things that were alleged that just didn't happen. And there were a number of other factors that were involved, like there were a couple of parents that, like the reason that this became a big issue is because there was a parent that wrote a red dot letter to the president. If you know anything about how that works, president gets a letter, immediately there's an investigation, right? And once there's an investigation, now everybody's eyes is on it, and immediately what starts to happen in the apparatus, right, is everybody starts to try to cover themselves to make sure that they don't get in trouble for whatever's going on. So this was an issue that, I mean, so much stuff happened and so many things went wrong in the administration of this because there were a lot of people who were just trying to cover up. Understandably so. Like I don't want to act like the people who were trying to cover up were doing something bad. They were trying to make sure that they weren't in trouble, which it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But again, when you look at leadership, and this is the thing that's so important, and this is the thing that I learned and I loved. My friends, my peers, right? One of my neighbors, one of my best friends was an infantry commander, took his group, his company, you know, to Iraq and Afghanistan, served and did things, and we would talk all the time about the way that he was conflicted between what he could do for his men and what he couldn't do for his troops and what he couldn't do because of the fact that, right, you have to be worried about this constant, what if somebody thinks I should have done something different? Yeah. Right? Even though I'm doing what's best for my people, even though nobody's dying, even though all the rest of that stuff, if I do it wrong, I could get in trouble. There's that part about it that makes it really difficult for a lot of people in leadership in the Marine Corps and in any large organization, because you're always, you're held to the court of, you know, subjective opinion, yeah, as well as, you know, actual what happens. So anyway, this case was a big sense of that. Like there was a Marine recruit that died. So, right?
Big thing.
Big thing, right? So these things are happening kind of concurrently in the same sequence. But the way that we kind of have these knee-jerk reactions, like the pendulum swings all the way back to the end, that's not rational. And so anyway, the basic thing that happened with the case, we wound up, my client got convicted for the things that he admitted that he had done, and we told the story. We told the story of who he was as a Marine. We told the story of what happened. We allowed the jury to learn, and we also dealt with the people who were there, because there were a couple of people that the prosecution brought in who didn't make it through recruit training, who wound up quitting and not becoming Marines. And let me just say that their stories were a little bit less than factually accurate, right? Yeah. As indicated by the other Marines who did wind up becoming Marines, who were part of the unit, who came on the stand and said, nah, he's lying. That dude, he never liked him, and he was always trying to make, like, we had this stuff that happened. And I mean, that was one of those cases we were frustrated about it a lot, because it was another one of those why are we here cases. Government probably spent $100,000 on that case, because we had to fly people in from all over the country. I was stationed at Camp Lejeune. My co-counsel was stationed at Camp Lejeune. We had to fly to Quantico and stay in Quantico for a week to prosecute the case. All of this stuff that happened. And again, my client was willing to admit to what he did wrong, but he wasn't willing to admit to all the stuff that they were charging him with that he didn't do wrong. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to kill his career and all this. And, you know, in order to become a drill instructor, this is the thing that a lot of people don't realize. In order to become a drill instructor, you are already one of the top 10% of Marines, enlisted Marines. Like, they get selected. It's not something where you just get to apply and people are like, oh, okay, sure, you apply it. They're not struggling for applications to be a drill instructor. So you're talking about very good Marines who have already demonstrated a career of service, who are sergeants or above, and have demonstrated a career of service, who've already gotten re-enlisted twice, you know, re-enlisted once and all those types of things. The Marine Corps has already said, you're good to go. Now, when they get there, there are some Marines that do things that they shouldn't do. There are things like that happen. I'm not going to act like that's not the case. But the fact that the presumption is that somebody's doing something they shouldn't do is the thing that bothers me. Because it speaks poorly of what we think about those of our service members who step up and say, I'm going to do the hard job. I'm going to go and do the hard thing. And that's what really frustrated me, and that's what frustrated me with that case. And so we were really happy, you know, at the end when we got the verdict that we got, and then we got the sentence that we got, which was basically he got reduced in rank for doing something that he shouldn't have done that. That was not smart. And then he got a reprimand, which said, yeah, you shouldn't have done that. That was not smart. Now go back and continue being a good Marine, learn your lesson.
That's good. Out of curiosity, you mentioned incentive training. I don't actually know what that is.
Great question. So incentive training is basically disciplinary training, but it's given a euphemistic name, right? So when you're in boot camp, and it's changed years over years. My father-in-law was a Marine infantryman from 78 to 82, and he came in and he talks about the differences, and there's differences even from when I went in 2009 to now, et cetera. But the basic idea is that when Marines recruits are not stepping up, not learning, not doing what they're supposed to be doing, there are certain approved physical punishments, for lack of a better word, that you can do. You can make them do squat thrusts, you can make them do push-ups, you can make them do certain things, and there's specific time frames that you can have them do those, and there's a whole procedure for it, right? Now, again, there's a lot of ambiguity in the procedure, so I don't want to make it seem like it's like this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. It's not like that. But it's one of those things where there's certain things that you know are acceptable, there's certain things you know aren't acceptable. That line does get blurred, and there are people that do things that they think are okay that aren't okay, and et cetera. Because I'm a lawyer, I know how to read the law. They get trained in it by non-lawyers, and so you've ever played the game of telephone?
Yeah.
Exactly, right? But at the end of the day, they were doing some training, and they had been doing it too long was the issue, and he realized that he had been doing it too long, and that so therefore they shouldn't have done it that way, and that was what he had admitted to. And that was the issue. And the reason that it became an issue was because there was a Marine recruit who, and to spare all the details, he had wound up having a heart condition. This was a heart condition, and this is the thing that is where the case became really problematic. His staff, my client and his staff were unaware of the heart condition. However, everybody outside of the platoon was aware of the heart condition. As a matter of fact, he had gotten a waiver for the heart condition largely because his father was a sailor, was part of and knew how to go around the administrative tape to get him in, because he had been denied to get into the Marine Corps, and then they had went around and he had been approved. So there was all of this stuff that was going on there. And so normal class with normal information, if he'd have known that he had somebody with a heart condition or whatever, would he have been doing that? Probably not. Was it still outside of the bounds? Should he still have not have done it? Yes, he still shouldn't have done it. But this is the reason why we have rules, right? Because you don't necessarily know everything that can happen if you break the rules, but you just need to understand that there's a rule. That was where his judgment was problematic, because if he'd have stayed within the bounds of what was acceptable, then everything would have been fine. He stepped outside of the bounds, and now you wind up having this kid that has a heart issue that passed out, came back, everything was fine. He wound up continuing. He didn't wind up continuing training. He wound up continuing training after that, but he wound up falling out because his heart condition was problematic. And what it actually did, interestingly enough, is it put him on the radar screens because, like I said, at the base they didn't know. So MEPS knew. MEPS is the screening organization for people to come through. MEPS knew, but boot camp didn't. And so now he was on the radar, and so now they watched him and they were like, let's do some more tests, and he wound up getting processed out as well, because he shouldn't have been a Marine, but he had been able to get through that process. But I say all that to say, again, I never want to make any of this sound like these people did the right thing, right? Any of my clients that were guilty were guilty. They were guilty of doing something they weren't supposed to do. They were guilty of breaking the law. They were guilty, and they should have had to deal with that. That wasn't my issue. My issue is always, our job is not just judge, jury, and executioner. Our job is leaders. We are to lead these Marines. And there's a letter that gets read every year from General Lejeune on the Marine Corps' birthday, when we do our Marine Corps birthday balls. And there's a part of, and there's another letter that he put in the Marine Corps manual, which is an officer training manual, where he talked about our job as Marine Corps officers is to send back to society better citizens than they sent to us. Society sends their sons and daughters to us to train and to lead and to take care of. And my big thing is when somebody does something they're not supposed to do and they're under my command, my job isn't just to notice that they did something they weren't supposed to do. My job is to make sure that they leave. If they wind up leaving my command, my job is to make sure that they leave my command a better person than they came to my command as. And that's something that I think a lot of people kind of shrug their shoulders at or abdicate because, well, we have to maintain the integrity of the unit. I'm like, yeah, we do. But those two things are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
You can take care of the troops and accomplish the mission. And that was always my goal in everything I did as a Marine Corps officer.
That's a good goal. So after that 6-month stint, you processed out, right?
Yeah, I finished out. So I did 6 months in legal support and then the last 8 months or so in the billet of regional law officer.
Okay.
And then I left the Marine Corps in October of 2017.
Was it a difficult transition?
Yeah, interestingly enough, yes. And I think it was difficult for a couple of reasons. Number one, because I didn't want to leave the Marine Corps. And let me rephrase that. I was torn. There was a part of me that wanted to stay. There was a part of me that wanted to deploy. I joined the Marine Corps. One of the other reasons I joined the Marine Corps is because the Marine Corps was the tip of the spear. They were in the areas that we were engaged in. I joined at a time of war intentionally, and it wasn't something where that was something that I wanted to be part of. I wanted to be part of the groups that went and to be at least supporting those people who were literally going, forward deployed, being the tip of the spear. And one of the things that I prided myself on as a lawyer, and what I wanted to do was to be able to be a battalion judge advocate, to talk about rules of engagement, to talk about how to keep our Marines safe, how we can make sure that we take care of, doing our civil duties and following all of the laws and the rules of engagement, but also making sure that we bring everybody back. That was an important thing all during my training. That was something that I focused on, really understanding how to have the discussion with people where they didn't feel, because there were so many, one of the cool things about Marine Corps training is every one of our enlisted advisors, every one of our officer advisors, all of them had been combat veterans. They had come back. You weren't able to be in the school unless you had been over there. And so a lot of the stories and a lot of things that I learned from them was, how difficult it was and how upsetting it was when you were in a situation and you didn't know whether you could shoot, whether you couldn't shoot, whether you could take care of yourself, whether you could defend yourself, or whether you were just really a sitting duck. And so something that was important to me and something I really focused on was understanding the rules of engagement and understanding the way to teach the Marines and sailors how to keep themselves safe while still following the rules. And that was something that, whenever I talked to people, whenever I worked with people, when we had units that were getting ready to deploy, any of the rest of that was something that I really prided myself on, because a lot of people, again, feel like you have to toe this line and this is how you must do it, otherwise you get in trouble. And I'm like, right, you've heard a lot of people say rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6, right? Like there's an aspect of it that looks that way, but there's also this area where you have to be able to understand what the law says and what the law is. And a lot of times there are people who are explaining the law, who are explaining it to keep themselves out of trouble, to make sure that they don't get in trouble for saying something. And that was something that I took pride on. I was very good at understanding the law, at reading the law, right? I graduated from law school with honors. I was a Dean's Fellow. I was a pretty good lawyer, right? During that period of time, my 70% win rate was the highest win rate in the history of Camp Lejeune. So I was proud of what I did. And so I wanted to make sure that I was the person that was giving that advice. And I was always going to give that advice in a way that was going to keep people safe while they were in country and when they came home.
Yeah.
So to your question, that was something that I wanted to do that I didn't get to do. So getting out, I was really looking at, and this is when me and my wife really started having a lot of conversations, because I was looking at going into the reserves, joining a civil affairs group unit, getting cross-designated as a CAG officer. I had done the training. I'd already had a seat locked in. And my wife came to me and she was like, I'm just now getting my husband back. Like, you can't be doing this right now. Because I was like, yeah, we'll get out. I'll be in the reserves. I'll get a job, but then I'll be able to deploy, because they deploy like every 6 months or so. And so I'll be able to deploy. And she was like, no, Like, I don't think you understand this. Like, you just give me the news that we're getting out, that I'm going to have my life back, that I'm actually going to have my husband at home. And now you're talking about trying to leave again. And that was a really tough conversation. That was a really tough time because it was something that I really wanted to do in my Marine Corps career. But I could see the pain in her eyes, and I could see and hear in her voice, like, just, it wasn't that she didn't want me to do it. It was that she really feared what happened, and her becoming one of those, like you talked about your father doing CACO work, right?
Yeah.
Casualty affairs, counselors, right? And
No one wants that knock on the door.
exactly. And for her, and this is what I didn't realize, like, I'm a Marine, like, I stood on the yellow footprints, I accept that possibility. For her, what she saw was the light at the end of the tunnel, where that wasn't a possibility anymore when we get out. And for me, I'm like, nah, we need to make that possibility keep going. Because I don't really, I don't believe it's gonna happen to me anyway. Like that's the mentality. Like, you don't go out there like, I think I'm gonna get shot, or blown up or whatever. And so you don't process it. But I could see the fear and the anxiety that it brought her. And so that's kind of transitioning was where the difficulty came in, because I still was wanting to stay attached and involved, and my wife was in the opposite direction. And then also I wasn't wanting to go and be a lawyer anymore. Like, I'd been a lawyer for 4.5, 5 years, really. And I did work in law school as a lawyer as well. So really, I've been practicing law for 5.5, 6 years. And I didn't like the process of, for me, the problems that I was solving were not actually giving relief to the people that I was solving them for. So as a criminal law attorney, right, like I said, I literally was 7 out of the 11 people that I defended got their lives back.
Yeah.
But I couldn't give them the time back that they had lost. Similarly, the other 4 who had gotten convicted, all but one of them remained in the Marine Corps because they got convicted of the crime that they had committed, or whatever, and the infraction that they had committed, right? But because it was at a criminal court, then they were convicted of a crime. They could have been at NJP or office mass, any of the things that they got convicted for. They could have been in those forms as well. And so we basically got them sentences that were commensurate with that. Like, we got one with a reprimand, we got another, he got reduced in one rank and was on restriction for 60 days. The other guy got reduced in one rank and was a reprimand. Like, nothing crazy. But I didn't have the passion for going out and trying to do legal work, especially for profit. And I didn't want to work I didn't have the emotional capacity to do any of the nonprofit work. Like, I have friends that are public defenders, and like, their stories are always sad and dejected. Because again, you got people, like, we got people that my wife has friends who, they got convicted of doing something that they didn't do, but because you don't have enough money for bail and you'll be in jail for 2 months until your trial, you plead guilty to a lesser charge so that you can get back to society and still go to work and keep a roof over your head because you got kids, right? Yeah. And so you get a lot of people that go into the system that way, and just different things. That was something I didn't want to be involved in. And so I started my company, Legacy Leadership Consulting, to focus on creating more leaders and building and developing more leaders in society, specifically in businesses. And one of the reasons why I love this focus is because the problems that I'm solving are not only helping today, they're helping tomorrow. When I teach people and I help them to overcome the obstacles that they have to being a better leader, to manifesting, like I said, the greatness that they have within themselves, and also to then teach them how to help the people that they lead to do the same, it's so amazing, because I get them past what has been plaguing them and I make their future better. And the past is not really even anything that we have to be concerned with. And so that has been tremendously helpful. And I always like to use the old adage, right? You give a person a fish, you feed them for a day, You teach a person to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. And what I do with Legacy Leadership Consulting is taking that even a step further. Because if you teach a person to fish, you can feed the whole world. And so a lot of the problems that I saw in education, a lot of problems that I saw good leaders dealing with in the Marine Corps, by really focusing on helping people to be the best leaders that they can be and to develop systems that develop leaders, we can solve all of those problems. Because when you create a leader, when you develop a leader, you don't just transform their lives, you transform the lives of everybody that they touch for the rest of their lives, their families, their spouses, their friends, their subordinates, their community, because they then shine that light of leadership. They embody good leadership everywhere they go. And so people get to see a different style of leadership. They get to see a leadership that takes care of the person and accomplishes the mission. And that's really, that's the journey that we're on now. And I credit so much the lessons that I learned in that great leadership academy, the United States Marine Corps.
So that's definitely had a huge impact on your life.
Oh yeah, tremendously. Like I cannot say enough positive about my time in the Marine Corps and how it's affected me, how it's affected my family, how it's affected my outlook. Serving with some of the most honorable people that walk the face of the earth, and being able to be part of that organization and the legacy that the Marine Corps has, I'm always, kind of in awe still that I'm a Marine.
Yeah, and once a Marine, always a Marine.
Hoorah.
So just a few more questions to wrap it up.
No problem.
I think I already know the answer to this one, but I always like to ask it. If you could do it all over again, would you? Would you change anything?
I wouldn't change anything. And normally I would say I would change that I would get in younger and do different things. But I don't say that because I know that I wasn't ready younger. I would have washed out. I wouldn't have been as committed. I wouldn't have been the person that I was, that I needed to be to become a Marine Corps officer, if I'd have done it younger. And so I wouldn't change anything.
Okay. And a question I always love to ask parents: if one of your kids came to you when they were 18 and said, "Dad, I want to join the Marines," what would you say to them?
I would tell them, you need to make sure that you're serious about this, and that I'm all for it. But if you're gonna join the Marines, we're gonna make sure you're ready to join the Marines, because it's not just a question of do you want this. It's, are you ready for it? Are you and I say this in all sincerity. I talk to people all the time about the Marine Corps. It's not just a job. It's a lifestyle. It's a culture. It's a brotherhood. It's a sister. It's a family. And if you're going to be part of that family, understand the role and the responsibility. You're not just taking from that family. You are expected to give to that family as well. And are you ready to give what is necessary to give? And if they're there, then I'm all for it. I think the Marine Corps is a great organization. I think that I'm one of those people that's a proponent for mandatory national service. So I think that everybody should have to, at some point in time, in between the time that they're 18 and 24, give 2 years of their life to something that is bigger than them. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a service member. Like we've got people who can't do it physically. I understand that, but in some sort of form or fashion, that you are doing something and operating in service to something greater than yourself. Because what it shows you and what it teaches you about who you are, about how your role interacts with the rest of society, and about the interconnectedness and the interdependence of society, I think is really important. So I'm a big proponent of national service in general. So if my kids wanted to go and serve in the military, I'm all for it.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about?
I just really appreciate the opportunity to do this, and what you all do with the project here, I think is phenomenal. And so thank you for inviting me to come and speak about my story. And to all of the veterans out there, especially those of you all that have served in the Veterans of Foreign Wars and the veterans who have served overseas, just thank you for the legacy that you leave. And I'm so proud and humbled to be part of that organization. So thank you tremendously.